From CNN Center in Atlanta, coverage of Election 2000 continues. Here again, Judy Woodruff, Bernard Shaw, Jeff Greenfield, and Bill Schneider.
12 o'clock on the east coast of the United States, and we are able to make a call in the last state to close its polls tonight. Alaska, the land of the midnight sun, goes to George W. Bush. It's 3 electoral votes. No real surprise at all here. This state has only voted for a Democratic candidate once since it became a state in the year 1959. So here's the total. George W. Bush, 240 electoral votes. His are the red states on that map. They are from east almost all the way to the west. Al Gore, 231 electoral votes. The states in blue, counting California, and going all the way over to the state of Maine. It is a close
Look at this. Just
election.
6 states left. One of those will put somebody over the top. We don't know who it's going to be. It's amazing.
This is the raw vote total at this hour, with 2/3 of the precincts across the United States reporting. Look at that, 49% going for George W. Bush, 35.1 million to 34.57 million. What is that, about 500,000
About half a million votes between
70 million votes cast, half a million votes separate them.
That's right.
Let's see now, when was the last time?
Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon. Nixon took a 500,000 vote win. Before that, you got to go to Kennedy-Nixon. But this is the closest race in 32 years, and who knows, it could get closer.
These are the states that are going to decide it. Let's take a look. There are 6 of them that we are not able to call. Arkansas, 6 electoral votes. Florida, the big Megillah at this point, 25. Iowa, 7. Oregon, 7. Washington and Wisconsin each carrying 11 electoral votes. There are 67 electoral votes up for grabs.
And Judy, 4 of those states were carried by Michael Dukakis in 1988, one of the weaker Democratic presidential candidates in modern times. And Al Gore has not yet been able to put away 4 of the Dukakis states. We've been looking at that all fall long. It looks like it may be pivotal.
A lot's changed in 12 years.
Why are the many reasons? That's precisely the question of the hour. Why
Here's why.
Able to do it?
A man named Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader is doing very well in Oregon. Well, not very well, but he's doing enough votes. Those states are so close between Gore and Bush that the Nader vote, which isn't particularly high, has the balance of power between the two.
I wonder if are we able to look at the raw vote totals in some of these states showing the Nader factor? I'm asking our folks who have control over the graphics that we're looking at. Are we able to see, for example, in Washington, in Wisconsin, what kind of Nader numbers are there?
In time, Judy, in time.
But it does indicate, remember,
in good time, I'm told, that will happen.
Remember, we did point to the Nader factor as one of the 7 keys to the presidency, and it looks like we're coming down to the fact that question, the answer to the question of how big the Nader factor was in some of these states, may determine who the next president of the United States is. He doesn't look like he's going to get his $7 million, but he may affect the outcome of this entire election.
Let's discuss for a moment why there is a Nader factor.
That's right. And we think we have some evidence to this point from the state of Oregon, where Nader's getting 4%. But we asked the Nader voters, how would they have voted in a choice between Gore and Bush? 61% of the Oregon Nader voters said they would have voted for Al Gore, only 10% for George Bush, and a quarter of them say they wouldn't have voted for at all. That is why the Gore people worried about Ralph Nader. By 6-1, his votes would have come from Al Gore, not George Bush. Right now, Oregon, the votes between Gore and Bush are nose to nose. They're very, very close. The Nader voters would have made the difference for Al Gore, and he would have carried Oregon most likely if Ralph Nader hadn't been on the ballot.
And his argument during his campaign was that there's no difference per se between the Democrats and Republicans. They're dominated by lobbyists and big corporations, and they're not to be trusted.
That's right. If you vote for a third-party candidate like Ralph Nader, you honestly have to believe that it doesn't make any difference which candidate wins, Gore or Bush, that they're no different on the issues that are important to you. And the Gore people trotted out a whole lot of reputable liberals like Robert Redford and Al Franken and Gloria Steinem to say, yes, it makes a tremendous difference, abortion issues, Supreme Court, but apparently there are enough Nader voters remaining who simply agreed with Ralph Nader. It really doesn't make a difference.
And that vote swapping that we talked about a little bit earlier going on the internet across the country, websites where you could go into the website and arrange, presumably, to trade your vote.
Yes.
If you were in a state where voting for Ralph Nader could hurt Al Gore and you didn't want to do that, We are now able to say the state of Arkansas is in George W. Bush's corner. The home state of President Bill Clinton and its 6 electoral votes fall to George W. Bush, giving the Texas governor an electoral vote total of 246, putting him only 24 votes away
And
from becoming
Florida?
the next president of the
And
United
guess
States.
how many
Florida has
Guess how many
25.
there-
And Florida, with the state of Florida, if it went to George Bush, he'd be the winner.
Or some combination
Or
of these
some of the
other
others.
states that we're looking at.
So-
Washington, Wisconsin,
Oregon and Iowa.
and let's look at that list again. We were just able to take Arkansas off. We are left with Washington and Wisconsin, 11 each, Oregon 7, Iowa 7, Florida 25.
Don't tell me this isn't exciting.
Notice, though, that one of the ways George Bush is inching closer to what he needs is by winning the home states of Bill Clinton and Al Gore.
Well, let's talk about which states on this list or rather George W. Bush is most likely to pick up. We know he's still very much in the running. He's in the running in all of these states. Washington is a state that Al Gore was given a better shot at going in. And I
That's
think
right.
the raw vote numbers we showed a little while ago showed that holding up.
Yeah, Washington has voted Democratic actually the last 3 elections, like Oregon, including Michael Dukakis, but of course we mentioned the Nader factor. You know, Sam Rayburn used to talk about the 49 states in the Soviet of Washington because it was considered a very left-wing state. It had a lot of union voters, and if the unions are needed anywhere for Al Gore, they are needed. They were needed. The polls are closed in the state of Washington.
If you are just joining CNN's live coverage of Election 2000 in the United States, wherever you're watching from in the world, if you're trying to figure out what is this, these 5 states with the total 61 at the bottom, those are the only number of electoral votes still outstanding, still at stake. It is very tight between Governor Bush of Texas. He has 246 electoral votes. Vice President Gore has 231.
It
So
is
this
close.
is the 61.
close.
And if Jeb
down
Bush
to those.
had delivered the state of Florida to his brother, he
Well-
would be president now.
Well, he
it's
may yet do that.
still
It hasn't-
outstanding.
He may.
Still much to talk about tonight. Let's go to our 2 reporters who've been spending the most time with the Gore and Bush campaigns over the last year or so. John King in Nashville, Tennessee, Candy Crowley in Austin, Texas. John, as you and the people around Vice President Gore listen to this talk about these states where Ralph Nader's a factor, what are they saying?
Well, certainly they believe Ralph Nader has been a factor, Judy. They do believe they will win Washington and Oregon. But as the vice president watches the results in his hotel room right now, we're told he keeps getting updates from campaign chairman Bill Daley. This mathematical fact, unless he wins the state of Florida, if our projections hold up, he cannot win the White House. As we just gave Arkansas to Governor Bush, Al Gore can now not get to 270 unless he wins the state of Florida. Now, we're told, he's being told by Chairman Daley and others that they believe Florida can turn around. Governor Bush still leads right now. They're saying the remaining precincts out are in largely Democratic precincts, but that could be wishful thinking there on the Gore campaign's part, but they must now pull out Florida. Let me give you a quick example of the roller coaster emotions here. Joe Andrew is the national chairman of the Democratic Party. He came out here a short time ago and said he was confident of a Gore victory, confident they would win Florida. Ed Rendell, though, the former Philadelphia mayor and the general chairman of the Democratic Party, already pointing fingers at the Gore campaign. He says they should not have pulled their advertising money out of Ohio, and he says they should have made greater use of President Clinton on the campaign trail, especially in Arkansas, the state we just gave to Governor Bush. Ed Rendell saying they only let the president go there one day. They should have sent him down there for 3 days or perhaps an entire week. Back to you.
You do get the sense the recriminations are already beginning, even though we don't know the outcome yet. This is going to be a very painful night for the person who loses. We are calling the state of Washington for Al Gore, and it's 11 electoral votes. We just heard John King say the Gore campaign expected to win the state of Washington, and we are at CNN now able to give those electoral votes to the vice president based on our examination of exit polling and the key precincts. Now here's the total. George W. Bush, 246. Al Gore, 242. You just heard John King say the Gore people now believe that there is no mathematically, statistically, possible way that Al Gore can get to 270 without the state of Florida, unless one of the states that have already been called for George W. Bush is taken back.
If Al Gore were to win Oregon, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and Florida went to Bush, Bush would win the White House 271 to 267. You think it can be closer than that?
Why don't we go to Hal Bruno and find out? Take us into the voting
In Florida.
In Florida.
in Florida, especially in Florida. Well, we can go to Hal.
Just to talk
We're
about
coming to you now, Hal. Take us into the voting and tell us what is going on in this Sunshine State.
Well, what's going on in the Sunshine State is the closest election anybody has ever seen. The 2/3 of the vote that's outstanding is right here on the Gold Coast, and that is the Democratic stronghold. 2/3 of the outstanding vote in Florida is in the Democratic stronghold. Over here in Tampa Bay, which is the swing factor, they're running dead even with each other, Bush and Gore.
But Hal Bruno, we did hear Karl Rove say within the last hour or so that the results that he was getting back from that part of the state, particularly the Gold Coast, gave him reason to believe that they were going to take Florida.
Well, he may feel that way, and who's to say he's wrong, because nobody knows at this point. But that was an hour ago, Judy, and the way the count is going there, it's so close that it literally is changing every few minutes.
So, Hal, you're saying that 2/3 of the outstanding vote in the Democrat stronghold stretches from South Miami, Miami-Dade County.
From North Miami up to Fort Lauderdale, up to West Palm Beach. And Broward County is about 15% of what's outstanding, just Broward County alone, and that is the stronghold within the stronghold.
And Hal, you're saying simply that those votes have not been counted yet.
That's right. And what it comes down to this is Florida could go either way at this point. We don't know who's going to win Florida.
Right now, our vote total, with 86% of the precincts reporting, George W. Bush has 50%, a little over 2.4 million votes, to Al Gore's 48%, a little over 2.3 million votes.
It's a 100,000 vote lead for those of us who like our numbers uncooked and raw. And I think Hal Bruno could, he said it perfectly. We don't know how this number turns out because where those votes are that have yet to be counted.
And Hal, what about Florida? Wisconsin still has 11 electoral votes, and we're not able to call that yet.
Yeah, Wisconsin also has gotten much closer. And Nader seems to be dropping off a bit in Wisconsin. Al Gore is doing better now in Madison. And Nader, let me show you on my little machine here. In this area, Madison, which is where the Democrats have to build up their strength, Ralph Nader at one point was pulling about 6-7% of the vote. Now he's only pulling about 3 or 4%. And so that's helping Gore. He's doing much better there. But here's the surprise. Up here in the Northwest, which normally is Democratic territory, up there, George Bush is doing better than anyone ever expected he would do. And the result of that is Wisconsin right now is just simply dead even, too close to call.
When you say Nader is falling off, Hal, what do you mean by that?
Well, at one point, Judy, he had been running about 6% in Wisconsin. And the last we saw, just a few minutes ago, he was down under 4%, closer to 3%. And that has to help Al Gore.
Hal, you are a political walking factotum, formerly ABC News political director, former Newsweek national correspondent covering politics. We're both from Chicago, both from Illinois. Your thoughts, what's going through your mind right now?
Well, Bernie, you mentioned Chicago, where we're both from, where we learned to be reporters. And you got to go back to 1960, when the vote was very slow coming in from the west side of Chicago. And it made the difference, and Kennedy won it. No such thing is occurring today. Same thing, though, happened in 1968, where the vote was slow coming not only from Chicago, but also from parts of Missouri. And again, there's nothing like that happening today in those places. I think the vote coming in slow today is simply because it's such a complicated thing. I don't think there's anything going on.
Well, we should also mention, Hal, that as we were in Florida, and we should give credit where credit is due. Mary Madeline, hours ago, when the networks had called this for Gore, pointed out that there was a huge absentee ballot vote total coming out of Florida. It now looks like we may have to go to the absentee ballots to find out who is going to win Florida and quite possibly who's going to win the White House.
Yeah, Jeff, you're right, because the question Bernie asked, going back to those previous elections, absentee voting wasn't the thing that it is today. Today, absentee voting is very important, especially in a state like Florida. And the bad news for the Gore people is when it comes to absentee voting, Republicans generally do better. That's been the pattern.
And how long does it take to count those kinds of ballots? We want to know when we're going to know.
Well, we know in Washington it can take a few days.
Right.
I think in Florida it probably will come a lot faster than that.
Well,
we want to go to...
we're going to Larry King in Washington, who has someone from the Gore campaign, a very particular someone. Larry.
Thank you, Bernie. Our panel will resume in a little while. Ann Richards, Howard Baker, and Bob Woodward. But right now, we'll go to Nashville. Mark Fabiani, a very familiar face now on the American scene, the Gore Deputy Campaign Manager for Communications. We have 4 states left. Florida appears to be the key. What do you hear?
It
Mark?
is. You said it all, Larry. Florida is the key. It looks like the candidate who wins Florida will be the next president of the United States. It's going right down to the wire. It's white knuckle time here. You know, all the networks called Florida for Al Gore earlier in the evening, and we think it's going to end up with Al Gore. As you guys just mentioned on your broadcast, 2/3 of the outstanding votes in Florida are from the Democratic strongholds in that state. When those votes start rolling in, Al Gore is going to go ahead. And the prediction that CNN and everyone else made earlier in the evening, Florida for Al Gore, is going to come true, and Al Gore will be the next president.
How about the large amount of absentee ballots, which was also discussed and which they also say usually go Republican?
I think that's an oversimplification this year. In Florida, a lot of senior citizens vote absentee, and senior citizens in Florida are especially concerned with Governor Bush's plan to privatize Social Security. So we'll hold our own with the absentee ballots this year in Florida, and with the Democratic strongholds yet to be counted in the state, we're very hopeful that by the end of the night, Florida will be where it started the evening with all of your projections, right with Al Gore.
Are you angry at anyone over those early projections? How do you feel? How does the candidate feel?
Well, it's hard to be angry with people. You wonder what happened. You had every single network, people who have been projecting elections for years and years and years and doing a very good job of it, all unanimously predict Florida for Gore. And I think you guys did so for good reason. The exit polls all showed Gore well ahead by 3 or 4 points. And the fact is that Bush is slightly ahead there now, but only because the Democratic strongholds in the state, Dade County and Broward County, still haven't had their votes counted. And when those votes are counted, Gore will go back ahead, and the networks will be proven to be right belatedly, but right nonetheless, and Al Gore will win Florida.
You will still need, though, one of the other 3, will you not? Iowa, Oregon, or Wisconsin?
I believe that's correct.
One of the other 3. Wisconsin, they're reporting dead even. Oregon, a little too early. And Iowa, dead even. So even though if you win Florida, you still got to win one of the other 3.
That's correct. But we feel good about our chances in the other 3. Those 3 states, as you've pointed out before, are traditionally Democratic states, and one of them will certainly break in our direction, if not more than one. It all comes down to Florida, and we're waiting anxiously for the results, and we remain very hopeful.
As our anchors have pointed out, why do you think your candidate has not done as well in, say, Iowa and Wisconsin, 2 states traditionally Democratic?
Well,
why is that so close?
I think, as you pointed out, Ralph Nader has hurt in Wisconsin. He's taken some of the vote that would normally go to the vice president. And I'm not sure about Iowa. I'd have to look at those numbers, and I'm sure smarter people than I am will take a look at those numbers and figure that out. But the bottom line is those states, one of those 3 states that you mentioned, will break in our direction. And when we win Florida, that'll make Al Gore the next president.
Is there any chance you see this going into tomorrow or Thursday?
That's a very good question, Larry. It certainly could go into tomorrow, especially if there are a lot of absentee ballots in Florida. And I don't think you're going to be able to tell who's going to win this election until you can tell who wins Florida. So it's all in the hands of whoever it is in Florida that's counting all these votes.
Thanks very much, Mark. We'll stay close. Let's go now to Austin, Texas.
Good to see you.
Good seeing you. Representative of the Bush campaign, Ed Gillespie. What's the mood there? Have you heard what Mark had to say, Ed, that it's all up to Florida? Do you agree with that?
I heard part of it. Not entirely, Larry. We feel good about Florida, by the way. We're outperforming our vote goals in Duval County by about 44,000 votes, and Clay County just south of there by about 7,000 votes. So we are optimistic about Florida this evening. But there's still some things, as you know, earlier in the evening, Florida was being called for Vice President Gore. That's looking like that's going to actually end up being called for Governor Bush. We're optimistic. But for example, in New Mexico right now, 98% of the votes are in, and we are down by 1,000 votes. But there are about 96,000 absentee and early ballots that have yet to be counted and opened. But they're identified by party, and 44,000 of them are Republican absentee and early ballots, and 40,000 of them are Democrat. That's a 4,000 advantage. We're down 1,000.
Oh, boy.
And so if the independents break the way they have during the course of the day, we will end up carrying New Mexico. It's blue on the map on the networks right now, but it's not likely to stay that way.
Are you saying, Ed, that you might lose Florida, chance,
No,
and
sir.
still win? Well, if
No,
you say you win Florida, it's why even bring up New Mexico? If you win Florida, you win.
Well, because I think it's important. I mean, every electoral college vote counts, and the people in New Mexico ought to know that that they're very much likely to end up in the
But
Bush
then you
column.
are saying you've won this election because you're going to win Florida. So, I mean, New Mexico is interesting, but only interesting. You've won Florida.
It's. I'm not saying we've won Florida at this point, Larry. I'm saying that we're outperforming our vote goals in a number of critical counties, and we're optimistic about it at this point in the night.
What do you make of this whole night, and how's the candidate holding up?
He's holding up great. He's obviously with his family and watching the tallies, and very much looking forward to having to come to a successful conclusion. We're optimistic.
We will have no mandate this evening, and we obviously have a split nation. What do you make of this?
Well, look, this is was always going to be a close contest. It's the office of the presidency was an open seat. It doesn't happen that often in American politics. We have two new two baby boom generation leaders as the heads of their parties, and the issues people are there were no economic crisis. We're at peace, and so the electorate was actually in a fairly content mindset, and so this race was always going to come down close. But I think that the governor's agenda that he laid out of saving Social Security, improving public education, modernizing Medicare, restoring our military readiness, and providing some tax relief to America's families, he'll have a mandate if we end up with 270 electoral college votes tonight.
But it can't be a mandate if one person has 50.2% of the vote and one has 49.8%.
Well, I think that we'll see how the Congress shapes up and how they view it.
Ed, anything tonight surprise you?
Well, there have been surprises throughout the night, but
Did any state surprise you?
Did any state surprise us? No, we were and are still in play in a lot of states that have been traditionally Democratic. I see that Arkansas just came in recently, Tennessee, West Virginia. These have been traditionally Democratic-leaning states, and so we were hopeful about being able to carry those states, but we certainly weren't taking anything for granted there.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you.
Ed Gillespie, spokesman for the Bush campaign, two very confident spokespersons, and both saying they're going to win Florida. And we'll return it now. We'll be back with our panel in a little while. Let's go back to Atlanta and Judy.
All right, Larry, what a night, what an election, what a count. We're going to look at 2 of the 4 states that we are still not able to call and look very closely at the raw vote. Right now, the state of Wisconsin, the Badger State, Al Gore has 48%. Again, this is 64% of the precincts reporting Al Gore with 48%, George W. Bush with 47%. You can see why this election is so close. In the state, and continuing in the state of Wisconsin, we're going to look at the Nader vote. Ralph Nader is polling 4%, while there is less than a 1 percentage point difference between George Bush and Al Gore.
Ralph Nader has 64,000 votes. That would probably give the state to him. Now let's go to Oregon.
Oregon, again, 49%, half the precincts reporting less than 1%, about 1% of the votes separating Al Gore and George Bush. But now let's look at the Nader vote and the Buchanan vote and the vote for John Hagelin, who is the Natural Law Party nominee in Oregon. We will check on those numbers. We're not able to bring them to you right now. We have to pull up an entirely separate graphic there, if you will. Our apologies. We'll try to do that. When we come back, we're going to take a break and look even deeper into these numbers. We'll be back.
The decision has already been made. The votes have been cast. They just have to be tabulated.
Tom, it's 12:25 in the morning.
What's my investment strategy? How about buy things before they go up?
For a personal financial plan, please press 5.
I'm gonna pay for this.
What was I? This market's still got a lot of upside.
This market's going south.
Why didn't they write this last month?
Can't believe Dad thought he could check stock prices on this thing.
Okay, 2 of your stocks are up. What about the other 15?
Thank you, Painweber.
Looking to save more and spend less this holiday season? With the Chrysler Holiday Sale, you can do just that. Because now you can save over $2,300 when you buy a new 2001 Town & Country with 4.9% financing. Or choose a $299 lease on the award-winning 2001 Chrysler Voyager. So take advantage of the Chrysler Holiday Sale today for savings that let you spend more on a real holiday priority, yourself.
Tomorrow on a special edition of CNN Newsstand, Jeff Greenfield wraps up Election 2000 with a unique look at who won the undecided vote. 10 Eastern on CNN.
Teenage singing sensation Charlotte Church brings her angelic voice to the beautiful songs of Christmas on her new album, Dream a Dream. Enjoy 19 holiday songs from the one and only Charlotte Church. Screen to order Charlotte Church's Dream a Dream. Make this Christmas and every Christmas more joyous with Charlotte Church. Call now.
Press and Novak talk about the new administration on Crossfire tomorrow.
It is a close election, and we're down to 4 states. We don't know the results of the outcome in those states. Let's look at what the states are. In Oregon, with 49%, almost half the precincts reporting, there is a 2 percentage point separation. 48% for George Bush, W. Bush, 46% for Al Gore. And now let's look at what Ralph Nader is drawing. 4%. 32,000 votes.
Way more than the margin.
Way more than the margin. If you assume that most of the Nader votes would come from Al Gore, which is an assumption that some people will make. Others may disagree.
Yes.
In the state of Iowa at this hour, with 84% of the precincts reporting, Al Gore is ahead by 1 percentage point, 562,000 votes to 551,000 for George W. Bush. And look, Ralph Nader, 2%.
In other words, if you assume most of those votes come from Gore, as our exit polls are showing, Gore's only up by 11,000. You could probably add another 6,000 to 10,000 votes to his lead safely.
Right. That's right.
And in the state of Florida, the one we've been looking at all night long, look at this, 86% of the precincts reporting. At this moment, George Bush 50% to Al Gore's 48,000, 2.4 million to 2.3 million. And now let's look at the other names on the ballot. Ralph Nader, 2%, drawing 78,000 votes.
Gore is losing by 103,000 votes. Nader's drawing 78,000. You figure without Nader, it would be even closer than it is now.
But the only state where we can calculate that Nader is clearly tilting the state marginally to George W. Bush is Oregon.
Pat Neal is in Washington at Nader's campaign location. Pat?
Well, as you were talking about, Oregon is the key here. In Oregon, it appears now that Nader has about 4% of the vote, according to some of these exit polls. Now, Nader is particularly strong. He's just come to the podium here talking about the strength of this growing Green Party, to talk about how people needed to sit up and take notice of this Green Party. Now, people in Oregon understand this. He is particularly strong in the areas of Portland, Eugene, Salem, the Willamette Valley, all the way down to Ashland near the California border. There are issues out there that have gone on for some time that Nader has been involved in, environmental issues, the idea of breaching those dams to save the salmon. Also the fact that one thing we need to point out, that Nader polled 4% in 1996 in Oregon without ever campaigning there. So that is a key factor there. Also, we've looked at Washington State, what he's done there. Also, Florida, as you mentioned, 2% of the vote in Florida. Now, Nader was just in Florida on Saturday night, rallying people, getting them excited, and getting people to go out and vote for him. He has been here, he's come back in, as we mentioned now, and telling people that, as we said, that this Green Party is something to be reckoned with. Bernie?
Okay, Pat Neal, I'm wondering, has Ralph Nader privately or any of his people in the campaign had anything to say other than what Nader has claimed, that he's not being a spoiler, he's not raining on Al Gore's parade, he won't cost him the election?
Well, he has said all along throughout this campaign, and they are saying privately as well as publicly, that Al Gore, if Al Gore loses this campaign, it was because of Al Gore. It was not because of Ralph Nader. He has said this repeatedly. He has said this defiantly down to today, that he is pulling votes because of his popularity, and it does not have anything to do with Al Gore. Actually, the Nader people have said that they expect and they predict 40% of the vote for Nader would have been people who never would have gone to the polls at all. Bernie?
Okay, thank you, Pat Neal, at Ralph Nader's headquarters in Washington. Judy?
All right, Ralph Nader, I'm looking at a quote from him when he singled out the Democratic Party, the campaigning he's done throughout this year. He called it a hollow party that tells labor unions, minority groups, and its progressive members, you've got nowhere to go because we're not as bad as the Republican Party. All right, we're going to go back to Washington now to our own Larry King. Larry.
Thank you, Judy, and let's get back to our outstanding panel. They are the Honorable Ann Richards, the former Democratic governor of Texas. She's been with us all night, as has Howard Baker, the former Senate Majority Leader and former Chief of Staff in the Reagan administration, and Bob Woodward, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Assistant Managing Editor of the Washington Post. Okay, we're down to 4. We had the misread on Florida. What do you make of it, Ann? Well, he has to win Florida, right?
Yeah,
You're a guy.
Yeah, he's got to win Florida, and he ought to win Oregon. And if he does, we win. If he doesn't, we lose.
Is Nader costing him it tonight?
I think Nader is cutting into him, but I don't think he's going to cost him the vote.
Senator?
I don't think so either. I think that, to begin with, it's a remarkable election. I have never seen anything like it, and frankly, I did not think it would be this close. But in the final analysis, it does come down to Florida and perhaps one other state, and that's just the way it is. And on Florida, with so many absentee ballots to be counted, I would bet, Larry, that it's tomorrow before we have a read on who's, it's already tomorrow.
25 minutes,
That's right.
Unless the governor were to win the other 3 states.
Exactly.
And therefore win it without Florida.
But Florida really is key, and it's going to be tomorrow in all likelihood before we know the result of that. Now, there are all sorts of combinations where one or the other could win, but without Florida, it becomes extremely unlikely.
How big a fuss, Bob, will this misread make? Tomorrow.
You mean the initial miscall on Florida?
This would be a whole different picture right now.
You can't tell, but I mean the difficulty right now is yet another misread. Clearly, there are very few votes that are the difference between victory and defeat here. Absentee ballots floating around. The Bush campaign spokesman was making a good case. It seemed that maybe New Mexico was still in play. So somebody is likely to come out with the Dewey beats Truman headline and have to take that back.
But I don't think the question is going to be the miscall. I think the question is going to be if there were irregularities. When you've got a vote that is this close, and you have as much money and time and effort invested, there are going to be some deep discussions about what took place in Florida.
Missouri might change with St. Louis voting late.
It certainly might. Let me lovingly disagree with Ann about that. I don't think we've seen any signs of irregularity, and even if there were, I'm reminded of that judgment that Richard Nixon made when he chose not to contest the election And you know, there were patent irregularities in the Illinois result at that time. I really do think that regardless of who wins, Gore or Bush, that the nation will unite behind them. I think they will have a mandate with United Nations the day after the election.
And the loser will
And I
acquiesce.
think the loser certainly ought to and almost certainly will coalesce behind the new leader.
Is this a case, Bob, where the media, the mainstream, as some critics call it media, was correct? They said we'd be up late. A lot of the others said, nah, it'd be over by 7:38. We'd be up late. We wouldn't know. Closest election ever.
Well, it turned out much more so, and I mean, it seems to be narrowing in a very bizarre way.
With a close popular vote.
I mean, what Howard Baker says is correct, but also it would really be nice when the election is over and everything is counted that there is clarity. It will be so much nicer if one candidate emerges and there is not this kind of ambiguity that lingers for decades as it did in the Nixon-Kennedy race of 1960.
It's not going to happen, though, is it, Ann?
The other thing to remember, though, Larry, is that there's some other elections taking place. The Senate is very, very close. The House is very, very close. I mean, regardless of what happens later on. Both of those bodies are going to be so tightly between the two parties, and this election being this close, believe me, government ain't going to act a whole lot.
The key then for the country is, what do we do, Howard? Let's take this as a fact. Half this country is in one corner and half is in another. How do they govern?
Well, they do govern because the country's built that way. And
Compromise.
Well, perhaps, but I think whichever man is elected president will have a period when there is cooperation with the Congress, and he'll have his opportunity. Some call it the first 100 days, but anyway, he'll have a period when he'll have his own mandate, and he'll be able to do a lot. And the country will demand that. I think if Congress and the president, whoever that president is, decides to go to war instantly, that the country would come down on them like a ton of brick. I just don't think it'll work that way.
What do you think?
Well, I think the interesting question is, what is the message that the public and the voters are trying to send? And the message is, to a certain extent, we don't want too much governing. We don't want anyone to have a mandate. There is enough uncertainty. Well, we want the military. We want the checks to go out and the military to function. But the programs that were presented by Bush and Gore, no one swallowed them whole. No one has a mandate, and maybe that's the essence of what's being said here. Let's be careful with new programs and new spending, and it's the old Howard Baker theme, less government.
Careful doesn't forge great leadership, though, does it?
Well, it doesn't.
Forge careful leadership.
Yeah, it doesn't allow you to step out and become a great leader. It does allow you, though, to be selective in the issues that you're going to push, and I think that that's what's going to happen whichever one of these men becomes the president. They're going to refine these issues down to 1 or 2 or maybe 3, because it would be very difficult in a divided Senate and a divided House, as close as it is, to be able to go with any large, expansive program.
In a sense, then, Senator, the public is sending these two men a message.
Yeah, it is. The public sent a very clear message, and the message, in my view, was not much difference in what you're saying. Maybe technical differences in programs, but you're essentially saying the same thing. Not much difference in what you're proposing. There are significant differences, but that wasn't the determining factor. They chose this election on the basis, really, in my view, of who they instinctively thought would make a better president. And you know, Larry, that's as good a way to judge a presidential candidate as any. It's really better than issue papers. Do you trust this man? Do you want him to lead this country?
Woulda, shoulda, coulda. What are they going to say about Clinton?
Don't know.
What are they going to say about Hillary? We haven't discussed her. She's the only one tonight on any network where they carried her complete acceptance speech everywhere.
And at least the part I saw, she did not mention her husband, who was dutifully standing behind her, clapping.
What do you make of that story?
Well, it is a big victory for her. There were lots of doubters. She went and did it by the book. She really worked hard. She mastered New York. In that statement tonight, she kept, you know, it's not as if she's forgotten New York. She kept talking about New York, New Yorkers, naming county leaders, and so forth. So she learned how to win, and she's done it. And the hat should go off to her.
If we have an important call, we understand. Thanks to Ann Richards, Howard Baker, and Bob Woodward. We may be coming back, we may not, but we have an important call. Let's go to Judy.
All right, Larry, this is not a call in the presidential race. It is a very important call, and that is CNN is saying that the United States House of Representatives will remain in Republican hands. The Republicans will retain control of the House. Let's go right to Wolf Blitzer over at the Balance of Power arena. Wolf.
Judy, the Democrats needed to gain at least 7 seats, net seats in the House of Representatives in order to become the majority, in order to allow Dick Gephardt, the congressman from Missouri, to be the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. That has not happened. Stuart Rothenberg, tell us what's going on in the House of Representatives, why the Republicans are expected now to retain the majority.
Well, Wolf, overall, we have not that many seats that changed hands one way or the other, and the Republicans did surprisingly well in the East, enough to offset any late Democratic advantage in the West. So, for example, the Republicans picked up a seat in New York in the 1st Congressional District, in Western Pennsylvania in the 4th. It looks like a surprise win in Eastern Connecticut in the 2nd Congressional District, where Sam Gabrielson may well go down. It looks like he has gone down. In New Jersey, it looks like Dick Zimmer has won that seat over Rush Holt. Zimmer, a former congressman, has come back to retake it from Holt in a close race. Congresswoman Pat Danner, a Democrat, retired in Missouri. Her son was unable to hold a seat for the Democrats. It looks like Republican Sam Graves has won it. And on the other hand, the Democrats just didn't pick up enough Republican seats. They picked up a district, Rick Lazio's district in Long Island, Suffolk County, the 2nd Congressional District, where the Republicans nominated an African-American woman. She lost. That's a Democratic pickup. And in Oklahoma's 2nd Congressional District, which we mentioned a while ago, at least it seems like days ago, doesn't it, Wolf? Other than that, a seat in New Mexico possibly, and some in California in the West, but just not enough takeaways by the Democrats.
And as a result of all of this, Dennis Hastert of Illinois will remain the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Well, that's for the Republican conference to decide. But absolutely, yes, the Republicans are going to keep control of the House of Representatives. They might have an additional seat or 2. They might be down 2 or 3. We can't know quite yet. We're waiting for the West Coast to come in, but they're going to hold.
We've been waiting for an important race in the U.S. Senate. CNN can now call a winner in Washington State. Maria Cantwell, a major executive of the high-tech industry, defeating the Republican incumbent Senator Slade Gorton. This is not a huge surprise, but it does represent a net gain, of course, for the Democrats.
Absolutely, and it's actually the 2nd time Slade Gorton has been defeated as an incumbent in a bid for re-election. Happened a number of years ago as well. The Democrats always thought they had a good chance here, but it was interesting. Both parties had very different polling. The Republicans were pretty sure that Slade Gorton was ahead and would win. The Democrats thought the same about Maria Cantwell. I guess the Democratic polling was better, and they were right.
So right now, as of now, the balance of power in the Senate, 49 Republicans, 47 Democrats, 4 seats in the U.S. Senate still up for grabs. Those seats are from Missouri, Michigan, Nebraska, and Montana. How do those states look right now, Stuart?
Well, again, if the Democrats have to get a sweep here, Montana is a particularly difficult race for them because it is a generally conservative and Republican state. That's a tough nut to crack. But right now in Michigan and Missouri, it's hard to tell. The Republicans could go 3 for 3, or the Democrats could go 3 for 3.
And that Missouri seat is especially interesting, almost unprecedented.
It's quite tight. It's a close race. Yeah, nobody knows exactly what to make of it, given the unusual circumstances. Ashcroft has been holding a narrow lead throughout the evening, but it's awfully close.
All right, let's take a look at the Senate balance of power, where it stands right now. There were, going into tonight, 35 Republican holdovers, 31 Democratic holdovers. So far, 1 tonight, 14 Republicans have been elected, 16 Democrats have been elected. As a result, the new total is this: 49 Republicans, 47 Democrats, 4 undecided seats. Those 4 undecided seats, once again, Missouri, John Ashcroft, the incumbent, against the late Mel Carnahan, the governor. In Michigan, Spencer Abraham against Debbie Stabenow. In Montana, Conrad Burns and Brian Schweitzer still up in the air. And in Nebraska, Ben Nelson and Don Stenberg. That race in Nebraska has been an exciting race. Normally, Republicans seem to be the power in Nebraska, but the Democrat in this particular case, Ben Nelson, he's still in the running.
Absolutely, but I think the reason Stenberg is doing so well is it's the Republicanism of the state in a presidential year. Republican insiders in Washington have actually been rather pessimistic about that race. Nelson, a former governor, was popular, lost to Chuck Hagel, you may remember a few years ago, has come back now. He's no longer a governor. He can run as a moderate Democrat. It's a difficult race for the Republicans, but I think there are a lot of Stenberg people that are shaking their finger at me and say, aha, we told you so, we told you this was going to be a close race, but I don't know whether he can win.
And let's take another close look at Montana. It's normally a Republican state. Conrad Burns, the incumbent Republican senator, facing a stiff challenge from Brian Schweitzer, a rancher. That race still too close to call.
Right, and Schweitzer, of course, used the issue of prescription drugs to his advantage early on to get a lot of earned media coverage, what we call free media, redefine this race. Burns was rather slow to respond, and I think Republicans are nervous about the seat. In the last few days, Republicans thought that their polling showed Conrad Burns with a slight uptick and were somewhat more hopeful.
All right, and we have a new race to call now in Vermont. We've been waiting a long time. CNN can now call Governor Howard Dean, the incumbent, the winner, beating Ruth Dwyer in what was a very, very close race. Howard Dean had signed into law in Vermont what's called the same-sex marriage provision, yet he went on to be reelected.
Well, this was a three-way race, and the real question was whether Howard Dean was going to get the 50% of the vote that he needed, according to state law, to be reelected, or whether the race would be thrown to the state legislature. As you mentioned, this civil unions issue was quite controversial. The governor had been popular outside of that issue and apparently was able to hang on.
So there's basically, as we're looking at the Senate, the House, the governor's races, no huge surprises, but there's still some doubt as far as the U.S. Senate is concerned. The House of Representatives will remain in a Republican majority. The Senate still up for grabs.
The one thing we can say, Wolf, there has not been a major sea change in American politics in the House or the Senate.
All right, Stuart Rothenberg, thank you. Now back to the desk.
All right, Wolf Blitzer, the one other observation I would make about the Senate is that as of now, there will be 2 more women in the United States Senate. Right now, there are 9 women serving, with the addition of Hillary Rodham Clinton from the state of New York, Maria Cantwell all the way across the country in the state of Washington. There will be 11, and potentially, if we don't know how Michigan's going to turn out, but we still have Debbie Stabenow running against the incumbent Spence Abraham.
And my observation would be to remind everyone what Trent Lott, the Senate Majority Leader, said here in an interview on CNN a short while ago. He really doubts that the Democrats are going to go 5 up tonight in the Senate.
One other thing. If the Democrats pick up 3 of these 4 seats that are out, it becomes 50-50, and if Joe Lieberman and Al Gore do win the White House, Joe Lieberman's decision to run for the Senate and not cede the seat to a Democrat who would almost certainly have won will cost the Democrats control of the United States Senate. I cannot remember any election where so many things turned on one thin dime.
Is there any question if Joe Lieberman had given up that seat that the Democrats would have retained?
Attorney General Blumenthal was they actually did some polling on this, would have been an easy victor over anyone the Republicans had put out. And I think, if Joe Lieberman becomes vice president, becomes president of the Senate, the first thing he'll face is a fairly angry minority of Democrats who said, thanks a whole lot for costing us control of the Senate.
And what Stu just said, if the Congress does remain in Republican hands, the House is in Republican hands, the Senate, odds are slightly in that favor, then that's really a vote for the status quo. Democrats thought they had a chance to break through. He said there was no sea change in that. It'll be interesting, however, if you have a Republican president, if George Bush wins, and a Republican Congress, this would be the first time the Republicans control everything since 1954. And I think a lot of Republicans would be overcome with excitement, irrational exuberance, and they might overinterpret their mandate if that's the outcome tonight.
Would it be so irrational?
I think it would be, given the closeness. I think the vote for Republican Congress is probably a vote for the status quo, and the vote for George Bush, if he wins, would not exactly be a sweeping mandate.
Well, just to point out, when the Republicans took the Congress in 1994, and some would argue they overreached and perhaps thought they had more of a mandate than they did, they handed a big club to Bill Clinton, and I think we even heard in what Speaker Hastert and Majority Leader Trent Lott have said is a cautionary tale to the more ideological Republicans to say, look, this is obviously going to be a very close, evenly divided government. Whatever happens, let's take it easy.
And the guy who would have the job of doing that would be, if he's elected, President Bush, who would then be able to say, he'd have to say, I control the agenda and I was not elected to create a conservative revolution in the country, because he wasn't.
And in fact, that's exactly what Karl Rove said to me. I had a conversation with him earlier today about this very thing, and that's one of the things he said. He said if we have a Republican House and a Republican Senate, he said we by no means assume that, you know, we can get what we want. We're going to have to work with both
And quickly,
parties.
if Al Gore wins and the Republican Congress is reelected, that really does look like a vote for the status quo in very good times.
All right.
And you have to consider the influence of Christian conservatives tonight in this vote.
All right, we are...
And what they did.
Yeah, well, they mobilized a lot of voters for Governor Bush in some key states, like maybe Iowa.
We've been able to call the House of Representatives, will be remaining in Republican hands. We're still waiting on the Senate, and we are waiting for the White House. We don't know yet. It's 246 to 242. Much more when we come back.
Coverage of Election 2000 is brought to you by Chrysler and PaineWebber. For expanded coverage, log on to CNN.com. Chrysler, we're reinventing the passion for driving. And PaineWebber, thank you, PaineWebber.
Looking to save more and spend less this holiday season? With the Chrysler Holiday Sale, you can do just that. Because now you can save over $5,100 when you buy a new 2000 Concorde LX with 0% financing. Or choose a low $259 lease on the award-winning 2001 Sebring LX sedan. So take advantage of the Chrysler Holiday Sale today for savings that let you spend more on a real holiday priority, yourself.
What's my investment strategy? How about buy things before they go up?
For a personal financial plan, please press 5.
I'm gonna pay for this. What was I?
This market's still got a lot of upside.
This market's going south.
Why didn't they write this last month?
Can't believe Dad thought he could check stock prices on this thing.
Okay, 2 of your stocks are up. What about the other 15?
Thank you, PaineWebber.
Got yourself into too much credit card debt? Why not point and click your way out of debt with a second mortgage from Ditech.com? Whether you have equity or no equity, good credit or not so good credit, Ditech has a second mortgage with absolutely no closing cost to help you lower your monthly payments now. So point and click your way out of high-interest, non-tax deductible credit card debt at Ditech.com or call us at 1-800-71-FIX.
The internet goes everywhere because of us. The internet is more reliable because of us. The internet is growing because of us.
The internet is more exciting because of us. The internet is faster because of us.
The internet is better because of us.
Delivering the most content from the world's biggest network, Akamai.
3 great names. 3 great legacies. Now, one great company with the power and vision to forge a new legacy, building the global community with innovative solutions for industry, transportation, power, and the environment. One great company. Washington Group International, the dynamic new force in the engineering and construction industry.
The political ground war for control of the White House is still underway at this hour between Vice President Al Gore and George Bush. Look how close it is in the race for the White House. The Texas governor with 246 electoral votes. The vice president, 242. These are the states still out. We cannot call these states. Florida has 25 electoral votes, Iowa 7, Oregon 7, and Wisconsin 11.
Now, notice there that Bush needs 24 electoral votes. If Florida were to go in the Bush column, that would put him over the top. Gore needs 28. If Florida were to go to the Gore column, he would still need 3 more electoral votes from one of those remaining states.
In other words, Bush could also put this together without Florida. Bush
Yes.
could win Iowa, Oregon, and Wisconsin, and no matter what happens to the state of Florida, Bush would be the next president.
And speaking of Florida,
Yes.
we heard a lot about absentee ballots, and Mark Fabiani Fabiani of the Gore campaign was saying, well, you know, those are seniors and that's our strength. As you pointed out earlier, it bears repeating, according to the exit polls, Bush is actually leading Gore among Florida seniors for all the talk about prescription drugs and Social Security. And where Gore is running big in Florida is among 18 to 29-year-olds, where our exit poll says he is running 56 to 38 ahead. So just to scramble this further, the notion that seniors in Florida are all kind of retired Democrats from the North ready to vote for Al Gore, according to the exit polls so far, that's not what is going on.
Well, what sort of margin do we know does Bush have among seniors in Florida? Bill, do we have that kind of information?
Yeah, Jeff has it right there.
I don't mean to step on Bill's toes, but I got the piece of paper.
You have the latest data.
Okay.
This is how Stalin beat Trotsky. He had the paper. 52-46 among, I'm sorry, Bush is leading Gore. 52-46 among seniors 65 and over. He is ahead 50-48 among seniors 60 and over. And as I said, Gore running very strongly in the youth vote in Florida.
And we showed in Arizona that seniors helped Bush carry that state. There was a very heavy vote for Bush among seniors in Arizona. So the idea that Gore is just sweeping up seniors with his Social Security and Medicare, that Gore is sweeping them up because of fears about Social Security and Medicare, it's just not so.
Which means that a number of them are perfectly willing to entertain the idea of having that Social Security money invested.
Or
not so much for them, but for the generations to come.
Or they might be voting for Bush for other reasons, like conservative views on values and a desire for moral leadership, and putting aside their reservations about his Social Security and Medicare plans.
Could this be the Clinton factor?
Well,
yes.
Let's hold off on the Clinton factor for just a second and say that CNN is making a call in West Virginia. The challenger, Bob Wise, has unseated Governor Cecil Underwood. That's in West Virginia. Jeff, the Clinton factor you were saying?
Well, I'm asking Bill, if seniors are not voting on prescription drugs and Social Security as much as the Gore campaign would have liked, could it be that for seniors, the personal misbehavior of President Clinton is more of a factor than in, say, other age groups?
Well, that's exactly what we found in 1998. Remember, when Republicans held on to Congress, most of the reason why they held on to Congress was because of older women, senior women, who appear to have been dismayed by Clinton's behavior in the Monica Lewinsky affair, the fact that they disapproved of his values, and that drew a lot of them to vote Republican for Congress and save the Republican Congress. In this case, they may be voting for George Bush, that's senior women, for the same reason.
Well, the House is apparently going to remain in the hands of the Republican Party, and the Senate, well, we'll have to wait and see what happens. One guest that Larry King has is especially interested in the Senate. Back to you, Larry, and your panel.
Thanks, and we're going to wrap it up with this outstanding panel. You're right, Bernie. You're interested in the Senate, 49-47 as of right now. What is this saying?
Well, it's saying that the country's equally divided on the presidential contest and in the Congress. It also probably means that Republicans will keep the Senate, but by a narrow margin. It means Trent Lott will remain as majority leader, but his authority will be tightly circumscribed.
Is this tenuous, Ann Richards?
I think it is difficult to govern when things are this even. The question is whether there are going to be broad strokes. You know, are you really going to privatize Social Security with this kind of a margin? I think they're going to look at the exit polls on issues. How did the country feel about vouchers, for example? I think that'll guide, because when things are close, people are going to start paying real attention to what the public thinks.
Well, help me here. Is this change or not change?
I don't know. I was thinking of the poor people who have to write the newspaper headlines tonight. It truly is a nightmare situation, because to a certain extent, you have to tell the readers, look at tomorrow's paper, not the one we're giving you.
Papers.
Yeah, Thursday's paper, simply because how do you write a headline that says, unclear, stay tuned, unsure?
So what do we do with this? There's nothing we can do but observe it, conjecture.
We could stay until 1 a.m. tomorrow, and maybe there would be a more complete answer.
You have been noble all evening. What has surprised you the most tonight, Ann?
Oh, I don't know. I guess that it really did turn out to be as close as it was. I thought that one of these guys was going to just break out, you know, and take it sometime at the last minute. but it didn't happen. It really was as divided as all of us who were out there campaigning saw it.
And you mentioned, Senator Baker, at one time tonight how happier you and Ann are than these people.
I tell you what, the highest estate in politics is to have served and retired. It is perfectly marvelous to be out here looking in instead of being out there and running and hanging by your fingernails to see how it turns out.
Why do they want this?
Oh, it's not a compulsion. It really is an answer to a call for public service. And I don't mean that to sound noble, but that is the motivation, Democrats and Republicans. And they go through an awful lot in order to do it.
It's just like, it's almost like being a missionary or something. You know, you just, whatever the time is, you feel called to do it. And you love it while you're doing it, but you don't know how.
Rejection Woodward and I don't face. You face it Tuesday in November.
Oh, yeah, but it isn't really a rejection.
You face
when you lose.
A sudden decision on Election Day. But let me tell you, and this, I guess, will be my parting comment. I have 4 grandsons, and each one of them, I will tell that politics and public service is the highest secular undertaking that they can engage in.
Well, I might say to all of you, it has been quite a night. It is still quite a night. It is going to be quite a morning. And we may be seeing you all tomorrow night. Thank you. Thanks all of you very
Good
much.
night,
Thanks
Larry.
to all our guests. Governor Ann Richards, Senator Howard Baker, and Pulitzer Prize winning Bob Woodward. New book is Maestro. Coming out. He's going to be with us next week to talk about that. Right now, we're going back to the national desk, Florida, Oregon, Iowa, Wisconsin. Guys, what's going on?
You said it, Larry. Those are the 4. Your guests have been terrific. You've been terrific. Thanks very much to all of you. We are going to take a break. It's coming up. In fact, it is 1 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 o'clock at night on the West Coast. We're going to be here till we know who the next president is. We'll be right back.
Tomorrow on a special edition of CNN Newsstand, Jeff Greenfield wraps up Election 2000 with a unique look at who won the undecided vote. 10 Eastern on CNN.
Dad, I want to let everyone know that we're Nashville's finest dry cleaners.
Yeah, because we do great dry cleaning, beautiful shirts, wedding dresses. We even guarantee stain removal.
And what about our service?
It's fast with same-day service. We're open late, and we even pick up and deliver for no extra charge.
A stain removal guarantee? Free pickup and delivery? How do we do it all?
It's easy when you know your business.
For years, Jones Stone Company has been adding beauty to the homes in the Nashville area. Jones Stone Company carries a complete line of landscaping materials, building stone, cut stone, and flagstone, and has the most experienced staff for installation or to help out the do-it-yourselfer. As one of the oldest stone companies in the state, Jones Stone Company can help you add that just right touch to stone projects. Jones Stone Company, for all your natural and man-made stone.
What about this one? All right.
Can't find the right car for you? Shop VHIX.com. Want access to 500,000 used cars? VHIX.com. Lease or purchase? VHIX.com. Or do side-by-side comparisons? VHIX.com. Need to find the right local dealer? VHIX.com. Find the right car for you. VHIX.com. Roadmap to the automotive world.
Steaks, seafood, sushi, and a dining experience you'll come back for again and again. Shogun, seafood, steaks, and sushi in Cool Springs.
Press and Novak talk about the new administration on Crossfire tomorrow.
From CNN Center in Atlanta, coverage of Election 2000 continues. Here again, Judy Woodruff, Bernard Shaw, Jeff Greenfield, and Bill Schneider.
Stomachs are tight, palms are moist, and people are walking the floor across the United States of America still in search for a winner of the White House. Right now, Texas Governor George Bush has a 4 electoral vote lead. He has 246 to Vice President Gore's 242. 4 states undecided. Outstanding. Here they are. Well, first, here they are. Florida, Iowa, Oregon, Wisconsin, with the electoral votes you see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Governor Bush has 246, as we say. His key to the White House, only 24 more electoral votes. On the left side at the top, Vice President Gore with 242 electoral votes. His key to the White House, just 28 more electoral votes.
And here's the reasons we're all biting our fingernails down to the nubs. Here are the numbers. This is the raw vote with 77% of the precincts reporting across the United States. George W. Bush has 49% of the vote, 39.7 million votes to Al Gore's 48%, 39 million votes plus some. Now let's look at the raw votes in those 4 states that Bernie mentioned. In the state of Florida, with 91% of the precincts reporting George W. Bush at 50%, Al Gore 48%.
To 65,000
65,000 separation. Ralph Nader, 2%, 84,000 votes, and you can see a few votes there for Pat Buchanan and John Hagelin with the Natural Law Party.
That means Nader's vote is bigger than the margin by which Bush is leading Gore. If you assign most of Nader's votes to Gore, you probably get an absolute dead heat in Florida.
Right.
Moving on to the state of Wisconsin with 76% of the precincts reporting. You don't get a whole lot closer than this. Al Gore, 48%, a little over 1 million votes. George W. Bush, 48%, a little under 1 million votes.
5,000 vote margin. Look at Nader's vote.
And there, Ralph Nader is clearly a factor, I think you have to say. 4% of the vote, 77,000 to a few thousand, give or take, for Pat Buchanan, and 630 for John Hagelin. In the state of Iowa, 93% of the precincts reporting Al Gore ahead with 49% to George W. Bush's 48%. Look how close. What is it? 8,500 votes approximately.
And look at
Nader's got 5 times that many.
Yeah.
Oh, no, 3 times that many. 3 times that many.
25,000 votes, 2%.
Point is, you talk about the Nader factor. When we come down to these states,
that's right.
What you can see is that in these states, without Nader, it's highly likely Gore gets them all.
And in the state of Oregon, the last one we're going to look at here, 54% of the precincts reporting. This is the state where you could only vote by mail. You could not go to a polling place today. You had to vote by mail or deliver your ballot today. George W. Bush, 49% with 411,000 to Al Gore's 46%, 388,000. What is that? A separation of
22,000 votes.
And Ralph Nader has more than the spread there, 4%, 34. Almost 35,000 votes.
And these are mailed-in ballots that had to be in before Election Day.
Yeah. One point. Very rarely does a third-party candidate have anything like this impact in a race. The people who talk about Perot in '92 costing Bush the White House, the Perot vote split, as our exit poll showed, almost dead even between Clinton and Bush. In this case, with Ralph Nader pulling nationally under 5% of the vote, he clearly has the potential to cost Al Gore the White House, which no third-party candidate, as far as I can tell, has ever done.
And it's important that it is not because Ralph Nader is doing spectacularly well. He is not. He probably won't get the 5% nationally he needs to qualify for federal subsidies. He won't even make 5%. He's doing that because the race is so excruciatingly close between Gore and Bush.
But Ralph Nader has said throughout this campaign it doesn't matter to him if he costs Al Gore the election. I mean, his argument is there's not a dime's worth of difference between these two parties. Clearly, Al Gore and a lot of Democrats disagree with that, but that is his contention.
Consider just one other thing. At the start of this race, we all thought Florida was securely in Bush's camp. We all thought the Dukakis states were clearly in Gore's camp. Neither of those things have been true, and that's why we're here at 1 o'clock in the morning wondering who the president's going to be.
All right.
Think about what must be going through the minds of the candidates. How'd you like to be George Bush? or Al Gore.
Or Al Gore at this hour. And speaking of the candidates, let's go now to our correspondents who know these candidates as well as anybody we know. Candy Crowley is in Austin, Texas. John King in Nashville, Tennessee. Candy, what are they thinking? What are they saying there?
Well, not only is it interesting to think about what the candidates are thinking about, but how would you like to be Jeb Bush, governor of Florida, who is sitting next to his brother as they are waiting for the outcome down there, which obviously can be quite critical. I wanted to put a couple of scheduling words into the mix right now. When you look at 3 of those 4 states that are currently undecided, Florida, George Bush spent 24 of the last 48 campaign hours in Florida. He was there all Sunday. Wisconsin and Iowa. George Bush was in both states yesterday. Certainly the strategist is looking pretty smart right now as this race comes down to 4 states, 3 of which Bush has visited in the last 48 hours. Judy?
John King, when it comes to strategy, are the Gore people feeling they did the right thing?
Well, they certainly feel they did the right thing in the last 48 hours. The vice president, just as Governor Bush, visiting those states now down to the wire. They're looking at Florida. If you look at the math, these other states obviously still in play, Wisconsin and the like, but the vice president can only win this election unless some state turns around. The vice president can only win this election if he wins Florida. We're told, he's been told tonight, that the outstanding precincts tend to be Democratic, but he has a lot of ground to be made up. And if you make calls into the Gore campaign, ask them about the Nader factor. Ask them about the words you get back are words we would not repeat on television. Very upset inside the Gore campaign about Ralph Nader's candidacy. But again, this all comes down to the state of Florida now. They're telling the vice president they believe he can make up the gap. As the tallies come in, he is closing it slightly, but that's it. The vice president, they're watching Florida. That will decide whether he gets to move up from vice president to president.
John, we're hearing a little bit of an echo because they're watching you on the screen right behind you. We're seeing 2 John Kings in the picture here. 2 is better than 1.
Bill Snyder, you said you wanted to emphasize something, and it runs stand into what John was saying about William Daley, his campaign manager, said you've got to win Florida to win this thing tonight.
Let's get down to where this really stands. Al Gore cannot win with just Florida. He needs Florida and 1 additional state. Any one of those 3 other states, Florida plus. George Bush can just barely win with 271 electoral votes if he carries Florida. If he does not carry Florida, he's got to carry all 3 of the other states in order to win this election.
He can do it without Florida, which is the difference. Al Gore must have Florida.
Al Gore must have Florida, but if Al Gore does carry Florida, then George Bush to win has to carry every one of those other states, Iowa, Oregon, and Wisconsin. That's what it comes down to.
But one piece of good news, there cannot be a tie.
That's right.
I mean, it cannot end now. There's no way to divide the remaining states for 269. There are many ways to divide it so that the winner has 271 and the loser has 267.
What you're saying is there will be an end to this.
Yeah, but you should see the smile on Hal Bruno's face when you just said, Jeff, when you just said there cannot be a tie. Hal Bruno just smiled, and he's smiling again.
I'm wondering, is John King still with us? John and Candy, are they still with us, or have we
No, they're still
said
with us.
goodbye? John, you said you couldn't repeat what the Gore people...
We remain.
Candy, if I can turn around and come to you on this whole Nader business. To what extent have the Bush people factored that in to their thinking?
Well, look, they're looking at the same polls that we are, and they knew all along that Ralph Nader would be a factor in some of those places. It made Bush competitive. It kept him competitive. I don't think in the long run, if this ends up to be a Bush win, that they're going to argue with what Nader did or didn't do. A win is a win is a win.
And John King, when you said you couldn't repeat what some of the Gore people were saying about Ralph Nader, how hard did they try? Because we know there were some efforts made to persuade Ralph Nader to pull back and you know, drop his challenge.
Well, it was a very late effort, Judy. There was an effort over the internet. There were petitions circulated to major NATO supporters from key Democrats, mostly from the liberal community, the consumer advocacy community, but they failed in that effort. And some Democrats also privately saying tonight, and one publicly, Ed Rendell, the general chairman of the Democratic National Committee, they're not just pointing fingers at Nader, they're pointing fingers directly at the Gore strategy. Mr. Rendell telling us earlier he thinks they should not have pulled out of Ohio so early. And look at the 6 electoral votes in Arkansas. If the vice president had won those, he could win the White House by winning the other 3 outstanding states, not Florida. President Clinton went to his home state only once to campaign on Sunday. That was because the Gore campaign controlled his schedule. The sharp criticism from Mr. Rendell tonight that they should have let the president out of the box much earlier, especially in Arkansas and perhaps elsewhere.
Well, Clinton actually tried to not so subtly indicate to Gore. You remember, John, a few days ago when people were saying to Clinton, visiting him, you know, you really should be out there. And Clinton said, tell Gore, tell Gore.
Well, Bernie, the Gore research did show, and other Democratic pollsters would agree with this, that the president could be hurtful in some areas of the country. But what Mr. Rendell was saying tonight, just in the case of Arkansas, look at those 6 electoral votes. If we could have won those. His other criticism was in Ohio. That criticism echoed by some leaders of organized labor. They believe they had a pretty good operation in Ohio, but the Gore campaign in the final week went from $1 million a week on television to $200,000 a week on television. They left themselves no room for error. That is the criticism some Democrats hearing tonight. They left themselves no room for error at all. So when they lost here in Tennessee and then the president's home state of Arkansas, now they have to win Florida. And of course, they're losing right now.
All right, John King in Nashville, Candy Crowley in Austin. It is early in the morning, 1:15 Eastern time. I guess it's 12:15 there in Texas, in Austin, Texas. We are watching an extraordinary presidential election unfold. We're going to take a break. When we come back, among other things, we're going to hear from the Capitol gang. Stay with us.
Coverage of Election 2000 is brought to you by Dodge and PaineWebber. For expanded coverage, log on to CNN.com. Dodge. In a perfect world, everything would be different. PaineWebber. Thank you, PaineWebber.
It changed the rules. And with each innovation...
This is a national sales alert from Dodge. Effective immediately, you can get low 0.9 financing for 60 months on 2000 Dodge Dakota and Dodge Durango. You can now save over $4,000 on Dakota and save more than $5,600 on Durango. You can still get 0.9 shorter-term financing on 2001 Dodge Ram or up to $2,000 cash allowance.
Magnum Power. See the friendly Dodge dealer near you.
How many experts does it take to predict a market change?
Tickets, folks. I'm out.
Tax laws have changed. Should I be looking at my estate plan again?
Anyone who knows me wouldn't recommend a stock like this.
Oh, not again.
This guy. Investment strategies for you. Great. Just for me and 5 million other people.
Thank you, PaineWebber.
Understand bubble technology, but the architects of the internet do. Agilent uses bubbles to help optical networks move at mind-blowing speeds. How does it work? Don't ask. Just enjoy. Agilent Technologies. Dreams made real.
I see her the same time almost every day. She's always there waiting for me. I bring her lunch up to her apartment and I sing Italian love songs to her.
Philip Morris provides grants to Meals on Wheels programs so that thousands of seniors can have a hot meal and a visitor. Philip Morris and Meals on Wheels are fighting more than just hunger among the elderly. We're fighting loneliness. Working to make a difference. The people of Philip Morris.
Want to start a family?
Right now?
I just got supplemental insurance.
What's that?
Aflac. Well, if we get sick, our health insurance won't cover things like lost pay or other expenses. This does.
What's it called?
Aflac! I don't know.
Aflac. Without it, no insurance is complete.
It's a presidential race that is hat band tight, as somebody said. We are going to the Capitol gang right now for some analysis and insight, and we're going to start with Al Hunt in Washington.
Thank you, Judy. None of us have hats on, but I'm here with Bob Novak and Kate O'Byrne. Robert, coming down to Florida, Palm Beach, Broward, Dade County.
This is just an amazing thing that we're picking what we used to call the leader of the free world. We still call him the leader of the free world, I think. President of the United States, very important office. These votes were cast, the polls closed in Florida 6 hours ago. This is the year 2000, not the year 1932, and we're still counting them. And it's this agonizing process of deciding whether Vice President Gore, in these closing hours of this contest, and they voted a long time ago, there's nothing going on, is whether they can bridge the gap. It's now, what, 50,000 votes between them? And I've been trying to do projections, not very good at math. I think it comes very, very close, but probably no cigar. Of course, just to repeat, if George Bush wins Florida, he's elected president. If Al Gore wins it, he probably wins it, because I think he'll probably win the other state necessary to get over the top.
Kate, if George Bush does win it, either that combination of the 3 states or winning Florida, CNN has already projected the Republicans will control the House. If they win one of those remaining 3 Senate seats, they'll control the Senate. That would be a sweep. That'd get everything, but it'd be a pretty lame sweep, wouldn't it?
It'd be a very big sweep, Al. Let me just notice the irony. In a long night, the first returns we know are House Republicans held on to the House. The nasty, unpopular House Republicans who impeached the president, the people who have said, where are you, who were persona non grata in Philadelphia, who was supposed to be such a drag on the Republicans. And the first thing we know tonight is that the House Republicans held on. Right. And the Senate is still in some doubt. Al, as you know, Republicans, it appears, have lost 2 seats. They could lose a couple of more. So
everything is close. Everything
it's just
moves,
unbelievable. Yes.
Everything that moves is close out there. You know, I have one thought about Ralph Nader. It's only the second worst scenario for Democrats, because even though he's probably going to cost, or he may well cost Al Gore several states, the worst nightmare of Democrats was that he would do that and get 5% of the vote, which would make him a permanent fixture, at least eligible for federal money in 4 years. It appears, Bob, he's not going to get that 4%.
It's another great victory for the two-party system, right. I would believe. And our old colleague Pat Buchanan really had almost a humiliating election. I want to go back to what Kate was talking about, the House staying Republican. You know, in this town, in Washington, it has been a matter of holy writ for about a year that the Democrats were going to regain control of the House this year. Now, they may in 2002, but who knows what lies ahead. But this was holy writ, and the lobbyists were pouring money into the Democratic coffers. Charlie Rangel was measuring the drapes to be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee.
And the rope.
Pardon?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and Speaker Gephardt, that's what they called him, Speaker Gephardt, in the cloakroom. This is really a blow. As we sit here, we don't know who's going to control the Senate, but the Democrats never really thought they were going to control it.
And Bob, the House Republicans deserve credit. Dick Gephardt really got his members to sit tight. The Republicans were defending many more seats, and they played it really smart. They played local elections. They had their members do what they had to do locally to win. I mean, it's a win they fought for, and they deserve credit.
They loaded up with pork, highway dams, everything.
You know what
the big spending Republicans, and it worked.
Well, they turned the tables. I mean, it is very difficult to knock off incumbent members of a majority party, as the Republicans learned over 40 years, and that's something Dick Gephardt's appreciating. He won't have this kind of luck, though, between now and 2002, keeping his members where they are. There'll be some retirements now.
I think we'll find that at most there's 7 or 8 incumbents that lost tonight. So once again, the system is an Incumbents Protection Act for both parties in the House.
You know, in the Senate, why is it that the Republicans in the Senate had such a hard time keeping their seats? particularly on a percentage basis, a lot of them were not very attractive candidates that lost now. Senator Roth, a fine gentleman, really shouldn't have won. His time in Delaware, his time had come. And I think in particularly in the Senate, the personality of the person is much more important than it is in the House.
Well, personality, Bob, we'll wrap up for the night. We'll go back to Judy Woodruff in Atlanta with more on this nail biter.
All right, it is a nail biter. We're all still sitting on the edge of our seats, such as they are at this hour. We've been here for, 8 hours and counting, and we're not leaving until we know who the next president's going to be. Much more to come.
What if we don't know?
Bernie's wondering, what do we do if we don't know?
Bring us food.
We'll be here. We're going to take a break. We'll come back.
Does everybody know what this is? A heart. 50 million Americans suffer from high blood pressure. There are no symptoms, yet high blood pressure is the primary cause of heart disease. There are still millions who are unable to lower their blood pressure with medication. That's why we're developing this new medicine, and it has excellent effectiveness in treating blood pressure. Maybe by the time these kids are my age, we'll have found a way to prevent high blood pressure in everyone.
You say you want to take a big vacation this year, as long as it is within reason. What is within reason to you? Is riding a waterfall down the face of a Mayan temple through shark-filled waters within reason? Is dancing beneath a dome of golden seashells within reason? Is uncovering the royal towers of a lost city that has risen from the sea within reason? This year, will you expand your definition of what is within reason to include Atlantis? Atlantis, once upon our time.
Call 1-800-ATLANTIS or your travel professional now for January travel specials.
I will no longer be a silent witness to my own kids' education.
I will no longer sit and watch the system fail my kids.
I will no longer let them use my tax dollars.
My tax dollars to tell me where to send my kids to school.
I will no longer let them put the system's
needs above my kids' needs.
I will no longer let freedom and choice be the American way in
everything except their education.
I want to have choices.
I want to have a voice.
I want to decide where to send my kids to school.
To create exceptional performance. Design technology. Kumho. My personal shopper, the latest online shopping tool, only from LandsEnd.com.
The American people, indeed people around the world, are watching a historic, unprecedented fight in a number of ways. A fight for control of the White House. Vice President Al Gore and Governor George Bush are locked in battle right now. Taking you to our electoral vote map. At this hour, Governor Bush 4 electoral votes ahead of the Vice President. Bush 246, Gore 242. Florida, a state too close to call at this hour, is one of 4 states still outstanding. Here they are. Florida, 25 electoral votes. Iowa has 7, as does Oregon. Wisconsin, 11. Look in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. The governor has 246 electoral votes. He only needs 24 to go to the White House. On the left side up there, Gore, 242 electoral votes. His key to the White House, 28 electoral votes. Now, we mentioned Florida is too close to call. This is the raw vote. Look at this, with 94% of the precincts reporting in the Sunshine State. Governor Bush with 49%, or 2.6 million votes, to the Vice President's 49% and 2.6 million votes. Ralph Nader, 2% of the vote. Pat Buchanan and Hagelin, but Nader the factor there, as we've been noting all this evening. In Washington, Mary Madeline, Mike McCurry, what are you thinking now? Mary.
Let's go home.
We're thinking we're going to send you some of our cold pizza. Would that make you feel better?
No.
Look. Let me say something. Since we're sitting here and we obviously are killing time because we don't know what the result is going to be at this point, that there is one thing that you can definitely say about either Bush or Gore. They are going to inherit a very divided federal government, a very divided electorate, a Congress that is split right down the middle between Democrat and Republican. And what are they going to do the day after tomorrow when one of them is elected president? I think that's the question we ought to start asking now. Now, the only thing clear about this election at this point is the agenda. Because both of these candidates and many members of the new Congress ran on basically the same agenda. They're going to have to do something to preserve Social Security. They're going to have to do something about prescription drugs, especially for the seniors who are on the Medicare program. They're going to have to think about how we improve education in this country, and they're going to think about how do we extend the benefits of a prosperous economy to more people. That's the agenda, and that's the only thing that's settled now. The differences between Bush and Gore on those were, frankly, at the margin, because they both basically are centrists running from the center of the political spectrum. So we are now left with a very, very divided government, and no choice yet of who our next president is going to be. But one thing certain, what the American people want this new crew to work on. The question is, will they be able to work together to get some things done?
Let me disagree slightly with my esteemed and sleepy colleague here. There was a movement for the kind of market-based solutions in Medicare and Social Security that Bush put on the table before there was a campaign. There were bipartisan commissions with which this president kiboshed because he wanted the issue. Those were not things that Gore ran on. They were very different solutions. Gore's were all government-based. Bush's were all market-based. There was no opposition evident in the exit polls for that type of solution. In fact, in Florida, the very state we're waiting to come in for now, which we thought was going to be won or lost over Social Security, there was a support from seniors for Governor, soon-to-be President Bush, in my opinion. So I don't feel as negative about where the government action is going to go, despite these slim margins, because there was an effort afoot, a bipartisan effort afoot for market-based solutions, particularly on Medicare and Social Security. Also, you'll note in all the exit polls, the second issue cited for support of Governor Bush was the tax relief or tax code reform. So I think Bush will be there. This was not a status quo vote, despite the evenness or the equalness in the vote outcome.
An idea, and either one of you or both can rip it apart if you would like. And that is, if you're trying to read anything into this election, and by the way, based on the raw vote numbers, it doesn't look like turnout has gone up much at all, if at all, that maybe one of the things that's being said by this incredibly close election is a plague on both your houses. Enough with talking points, enough with people coming on television and spinning the line of the day, enough with characterizations of the opposition that don't bear that much relationship to the truth. What do you think? Michael, go ahead.
Yes. Jeff, I think that is right. There's a lot of wisdom in something our friend Ron Brownstein pointed out a long time ago. I think that this election was about the American people saying they like the way things are going in this country. It's one of the reasons why they approve of the performance of Bill Clinton in office as president. But they want things to change here in Washington. They want people to work together. And at the end of the day, that may have been the thing that helps push Governor Bush over the top, because his message was more aimed at bringing people together to do the business of the country, Democrat and Republican together. Now, he is going to be put severely to the test. His very first assignment, if he ends up winning Florida and winning the presidency, is going to be to put the strong people in his party in the Congress, like DeLay and Army, in a box and tell them that they have to learn how to get along with their neighbors across the aisle. That's going to be very, very hard to do. But I think you may be onto something there, that what the message of this election might be is the country is fine, we're going along well, we appreciate the performance we've had, but we now really need to get down to business in Washington and start solving some problems.
Yeah, Mary, the way I want to phrase it, and just get your reaction to it, is that the thing that Americans see about politics every night on the cable news networks and in the Congress, the kind of what George Bush the father called this bickering, is something that drives people crazy independent of ideology. And I don't know whether or not you think that's right, and if it is, whether Washington can break the habit like you have to break a drug habit sometimes.
Well, and we bear some responsibility of that because there's a chicken or an egg thing going on here. They know if they say things in an acrimonious or provocative way that they're more likely to be covered. But I do think Bush was onto something when he said, look, we just got to break this habit. We who have been here for a long time, you know, we're kind of like, I don't in any way mean to make this a frivolous comparison, but we're kind of like the Mideast. You know, we just have these inescapable reactions to each other, which I think this whole new crew coming in will be able to change. Changing the tone requires bringing new people in with it who don't have these kind of old grudges, and I think that'll work. And I really believe this, having been here for 20 years. People who come to Washington, public servants it's a noble profession, and they make a lot of sacrifices. They want to serve the public. They don't want to behave like this anymore. They want to get their job done. They come with ideas and idealism, and I think on both sides of the aisle, they'll be looking forward to working together. I really believe that. Either I believe that or I'm really tired.
Well, one thing is really true is that nobody is going to be elected with much of a mandate. Neither Vice President Bush, or Vice President Gore, if he's elected, or Governor Bush, or the Congress, which is split down the middle. They're going to have to work together to fulfill the wishes of the American people.
I'm curious. I know when you're not on CNN, you're on the telephones. At this late hour, what are you hearing?
We're hearing the same thing that we've had guests on CNN and elsewhere say tonight, that they are, you know, both campaigns, I think, desperately watching those returns from those final states that are out there with no better idea than we have here right now what's going to happen. Long ago in the evening, their models, their projections, their turnout variances that they were measuring all went by the wayside because it's now down to those handful of votes in some of these places that are still undecided.
But Bernie, I will tell you specifically in the outstanding states, Jeb's people, Governor Jeb Bush's people really feel confident, as they have all night, about what's left out in Florida coming home for the other Governor Bush. The field director feels, and was saying in the middle of my conversation about, look, if CNN is saying there's a 20,000 vote disparity in Wisconsin, she said, hang on, and you know, the next time you came up, there was a 2,000 vote disparity. So they're feeling good about Oregon, Wisconsin, and still confident about Florida.
Mary Matalin, your bet awaits you, as does yours. Mike McCurry, we thank you for being such real stallions tonight in our coverage of this fascinating story.
We hope you get released soon, too.
Well, you're not the only one hoping that. Judy.
Well, we hope that you're not abandoning us. Does this mean Mike and Mary are leaving us?
Yeah, they're going to bed.
Yes.
Uh-oh. Can't we persuade you to hang around a few more minutes? Thank you both. Fascinating. Let's take, we're talking about numbers. Let's take another look at the raw vote numbers in the state of Florida, with 95% of the precincts reporting, 49% to 49%. I think Mary just referred to this. It's a 20,000, no, I think she was talking about Wisconsin, but this is a 20,000 vote separation among over more than 5 million votes cast. We're going to go directly to St. Louis, Missouri, to the man who would like to have been Speaker of the House of Representatives. Let's listen.
All of the people here, and some not here, who helped me win this campaign. I want to thank every worker. I want to especially thank Joyce Abusi, who's the best political director in the entire world. And I want to thank every one of you who helped me, who went door to door with us, who helped us make telephone calls, who took us to the picnics, who helped us talk to the people about the issues that matter to the people in this district. and I will work every day to help the people of the 3rd District of Missouri.
Dick Gephardt, the minority leader of the House of Representatives, re-elected to another term in the U.S. Congress, 2-year term. As I mentioned a moment ago, he would have liked to have been have an additional title there to be Speaker of the House, but as CNN is projecting, we've said this earlier, we think the House will remain in Republican control. We are going to look again at those numbers coming in from the state of Florida. And to help us do it, we're going over to that map and to Hal Bruno. Hal, what is left to come in?
Judy, the lead has been cut down to about 20,000, Bush over Gore in Florida. And what is outstanding is basically Democratic territory along the Gold Coast. Let's look at the map here. All right, it's this area here from Miami up to West Palm Beach. Now, 26% of what's outstanding is from Broward County, and that's heavily Jewish and that's heavily Democratic. 45% is from Dade County. Now, Dade County splits 2 ways. Part of it is African American, which is Democratic. Part of it is Cuban American, which is Republican. We don't know which part of it is still outstanding. But the thing is, Florida has gotten so close now that there's just absolutely no way of counting it until probably every last vote is in.
We did hear Mary Madeline say, and then earlier tonight, Carl, we've heard other folks who represent the Bush campaign say that they are still optimistic, that they think there are either enough absentee votes, enough of a Republican presence in those areas to give the state to George W. Bush.
Yeah, they've got 2 reasons to be optimistic. One is it could be some of that outstanding vote is from the districts that are Cuban American, which is Republican, and a lot of it could be absentee, which tends to be Republican. On the other hand, Gore's got some reason for optimism too, because some of what's outstanding is from very solid Democratic territory.
And tell us again, Hal, how long may it be before we know the answer to how Florida goes?
1 hour, 14 minutes, and 20 seconds. Judy, I don't have the slightest idea how long it's going to be.
Hope springs eternal, Hal. All right, we said there are 4 states out. We've said it over and over again. It is the state of Florida with the 25 votes. That is the crucial state. And there is Iowa, Wisconsin, and Oregon. And Bill Schneider, you've been looking at some exit polls.
Well, we've looked at some exit polls in Florida. And what we find in Florida is that Jewish voters are about 80% Democratic. Blacks are about 90% Democratic. You know, Hal mentioned the Cuban American vote. People think that most Hispanic voters in Florida are Cuban Americans. In fact, a lot of them are not. The Hispanic vote in Florida in our exit poll is breaking just about 50-50 for Bush and Gore, which has got to be good news for Gore because Bush is probably counting on a heavy Cuban American vote, which is historically Republican. But a lot of Hispanic women, particularly in Florida, have been voting Democratic in recent elections. So it looks like the Hispanic vote is not as reliably Republican as it used to be in Florida.
This Hispanic vote in Florida, we've learned, is a vote. These are people who have come from other parts of Latin and South America, people from Central America, South America.
That's right.
We also know that the Cuban second and third generation vote is not as Republican as the older.
Now, the guessing was that the Elian Gonzalez issue might have driven a lot of Cuban Americans back to the Republican Party because they split pretty closely between Clinton and Dole last time. But it appears that the Hispanic vote in Florida, which is concentrated in South Florida, where Hal said the vote is still out, that vote is splitting a lot closer than people expected it to.
I would just make one other point, that this, for some of us, this is very reminiscent of 1976. There was no question that Carter had won the popular vote, but it was in the middle of the night or in early morning when the votes from Mississippi and Ohio came in, both states in a matter of a few thousand votes, that put Jimmy Carter into the White House. So when Judy plaintively asked, when will we know, history may not be kind to your hopes for an end to this.
I have some information. The Florida election authorities report that it is likely that close to 1 million absentee ballots were sent out statewide in Florida. Almost all of them, including the absentee ballots, will be counted by 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, including the overseas ballots, military and non-military, that were received by Election Day. 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, they say almost all of them will be counted.
And it's just 1:45 Eastern time, so we may only have an hour and 45 minutes to go.
Well, one man who won't go to sleep is a man in Aurora, Illinois, the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Washington. When we come back, Dennis Hastert will join us. Our coverage continues.
The internet is faster because of us.
The internet is more reliable because of us.
The internet is growing because of us.
The internet is more exciting because of us.
The internet goes everywhere because of us. The internet is better because of us.
Delivering the most content from the world's biggest network, Akamai.
Alzheimer's disease takes billions of healthy brain cells and slowly turns them into a tangled web. At our pharmaceutical company, we're trying to remove the amyloid plaque from the brain of the Alzheimer patient. And we are developing a vaccine that activates the immune system to help remove that plaque. My hope is that nobody's parent or grandparent will ever suffer from this disease again.
Looking to save more and spend less this holiday season? With the Chrysler Holiday Sale, you can do just that. Because now you can save over $2,300 when you buy a new 2001 Town & Country with 4.9% financing. Or choose a $299 lease on the award-winning 2001 Chrysler Voyager. So take advantage of the Chrysler Holiday Sale today for savings that let you spend more on a real holiday priority, yourself.
A typical day for the IT manager. Everyone wants everything now. Luckily, there's CDW, your direct solutions provider. CDW uses 50,000 top-name products to give you complete systems, including custom configuration and pre-installed software. Why get hung up in work when CDW is here to make life easier? CDW, computing solutions built for business.
Absolutely gorgeous. Yes, you are. Oops. He's not going to like that. Perfect. Now tell me this isn't the finest crop you've ever seen.
Why don't you go next?
For the best flakes, we only accept the best corn. Kellogg's Corn Flakes.
We are back. It's 1:46 Eastern Time. We're still waiting to find out who the next president of the United States will be. We can tell you that CNN does estimate, well, before I give you the turnout estimate, let me show you what the raw vote numbers are. 83% of the precincts reporting across the nation. George W. Bush, 42.1 million votes, 49%. To Al Gore's 41.4 million, 48%. This is one close election.
650,000 votes spread out of 83.5 million votes cast.
We can tell you on the turnout, and I don't know whether we're going to show you any other numbers at this point, Ralph Nader, probably not. But I will. What we can tell you is that CNN is able to estimate that the turnout among the voting age population in the United States is going to be around 50%. Now, that is an increase from the turnout in 1996, the year of the last presidential election, but only a very slight increase. So all the reports we've been hearing all day long about how the voters are turning out in record numbers, Jeff Greenfield, as you're so fond of reminding me, let's wait and see how many people actually turn out.
We go through this every 2 or 4 years. In the middle of the day, people see long lines and they say record turnout, the experts are wrong. I mean, when you think about this, 4 years ago, it was a slam dunk for Clinton to beat Dole. Everyone knew how that was going to come out. Now you have, and we've all been predicting, and it turns out these predictions were right, one of the closest elections in the history of the United States, and the turnout went from 49% in 1996 to 50% in the year 2000. That is not a huge vote of passion and interest in the political process when you think about this election.
Yes.
Now, there had been predictions that the turnout would be even lower, though. So if you're thinking in that direction, you could say this was an improvement. We want to go right now to our balance of power area over there across the newsroom to CNN's Wolf Blitzer for an update. Wolf.
Judy, you want to take a look at the U.S. Senate right now to see where that balance of power in the Senate is stacking up. In the U.S. Senate, there were 35 Republican holdovers, 31 Democrats. The Republicans have won 14 seats. The Democrats tonight have won 16 seats. That brings the total to what we know right now, 49 seats for the Republican, 47 seats for the Democrats. 4 seats are still undecided. The Democrats would have to win all 4 of those seats in order to become the majority in the Senate. Let's take a look and see how close those 4 seats are. In Missouri, right now, Mel Carnahan, who died in a plane crash 2 or 3 weeks ago, he is getting 51% of the vote to Senator John Ashcroft, the Republican incumbent, 49%. But look at that actual vote total, very close. In Michigan right now, the incumbent Republican Spencer Abraham, 51% to Debbie Stabenow, the Democratic challenger. But look at that number, still very close with only 68% of the voters tallied so far. In Nebraska, the open seat, Bob Kerrey vacated that seat. The Democrat, Ben Nelson, is slightly ahead of Don Stenberg, the Republican. But look at the number, with 82% reporting, very, very close. Only 6,000 votes or so making a difference in Nebraska so far. In Montana, Conrad Burns slightly ahead of the challenger, Brian Schweitzer, the Democrat. Once again, only 62% of that number is there. Let's talk to Stuart Rothenberg and see what's happening with those 4 Senate seats.
Well, Wolf, obviously these are just too close to call. It's amazing the narrow margins given the considerable votes already cast. Clearly, somebody like Conrad Burns is in better position. He's an incumbent. It's a conservative state. But none of these races look locked up at the moment.
It's going to be a long night for a lot of these races. They're going to be looking at absentee ballots. They're going to be looking at every precinct.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure you're going to have the legal teams flying out of there from the Democratic Senate Committee and the Republican Senate Committee to make sure they're checking with ballot security and recounts and soiled ballots, things like that. So I think, you know, some of these races could drag on indefinitely. And I just would add, Wolf, it's not just these races. I was noticing a couple of the House races. I had referred to a New Jersey race, Dick Zimmer against Rush Holt, and my computer showed 100% of the vote in, and I looked a few minutes later and saw 100% of the vote in still, in a slightly different result. The latest result actually has Rush Holt ahead of Dick Zimmer by 56 votes. I don't know if that's a final or just a preliminary final.
Although we will recap, we are projecting that the Republicans will maintain the majority in the House of Representatives. Back to Judy on the National Desk.
All right, Wolf, thanks to you and thanks to Stu Rothenberg. A little while ago, we were in Aurora, Illinois, speaking with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Dennis Hastert. We're going to go back to him now. Mr. Speaker, as you look at more of these numbers coming in, and as you look at this very undecided presidential race, what are you thinking about in terms of making government work in the next few years?
Well, clearly, we have to reach across the aisle and try to do things on a bipartisan basis. I think the president, whoever he's going to be, I certainly hope it's George W. Bush, is going to have to do the same. And I think we're looking for people, and I think the American people are looking for people who are willing to bring people together and get things done. And that's what I've tried to do since I've been Speaker, and I think that's what we'll continue to do.
We've noticed a number of Democrats who work with you in the House have commented on the difference in style between you and your predecessor, Newt Gingrich. Did you go into this position deliberately wanting to be a different kind of leader in the Congress?
Well, I felt very strongly when I became Speaker that we had to prove to the American people that we could get some things done. And I talked about a better education in this country for our kids. We talked about supporting our men and women who serve this country and our national defense. We talked about balance in a budget. We talked about paying down the debt. And we talked about not taking a penny of the Social Security and Medicare Trust Fund and spending it in general revenue funds. We did those things, and especially balancing the budget, paying down the debt, and protecting Social Security. That's never been done before by any Congress. So I think that type of getting things done is what the American people wanted.
Some people have had the impression that Governor Bush, and I'm not clear on this, did not campaign or spend much time campaigning with and for Republican members of Congress. Set me straight on that. How much campaigning did he do with members of the House members of the Senate?
Well, he actually campaigned with a lot of our members. And when he was in a district, our members were there with him, and especially our members who were vulnerable and our challengers that we needed to get out and get some recognition. He did a very good job, and we're pleased with his cooperation.
Do you agree with his characterization that there has been too much partisanship, too much just bitterness and fighting and division in the nation's capital that needs to be healed?
Well, you know, I tried to get beyond that when I became Speaker, but clearly Dick Gephardt wanted to be Speaker. He set on a policy of trying to stop everything so we would have what they called a do-nothing Congress, and try to blame that on us so that they become the majority. It didn't happen. And in spite of what those tactics were, we did get a lot of things done. And the things that we did do were done on a bipartisan basis. The marriage penalty was done on a bipartisan basis. Tax relief on death was done on a bipartisan basis. The PNTR for China was done on a bipartisan basis. The sweeping banking reform was done on a bipartisan basis. So we will continue to do that.
Well, then, does George W. Bush's characterization hold up?
Well, I think sometimes that people don't really see what goes on, but I think the president can be very helpful to us in trying to help and reach across the aisle in the House and in the Senate to try to get things done on a bipartisan basis.
Mr. Speaker, it's Jeff Greenfield. Some of your colleagues have said that the culture has changed, that there was a time when people would battle politically and then go home and have dinner together and meet each other's families, and that there was a kind of much more collegial atmosphere, and that without putting blame on one side or another, that it's become a much less civil place, that is to say the Congress of the United States. Is the closeness of this election, do you think, potentially a piece of evidence that says to people on all sides that the culture just has to change, that the sniping and the partisanship and going on television and yelling at each other with talking points is just had it?
Well, I think you've watched my performance. I haven't been on television every time you turn around. I've tried to make the House work and to bring people together to make that House work. I think that's what the American people want. A lot of the people who are shrill aren't there anymore. We've had some real changes, and some of them even lost in this election. So I think we're well on the way. I would certainly offer my hand across the aisle so we can get some things done.
Well, that's when
you have to realize one other thing there is a difference in philosophy between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and we do that fighting. It's for philosophical differences as well.
Well, when you point out that some of the shrillness is gone and some of the bitterness has faded, perhaps that's why I'm asking this characterization that George W. Bush was talking about out on the campaign trail repeatedly day after day during this campaign. I guess I'm asking you, does it match the reality of what you've lived with in Washington the last 2 years?
Well, it's been a tough time in Washington the last 2 years. We had a 1.2% margin of error. Anytime that 4 members or 5 members of Congress got up on the wrong side of the bed, the whole balance of Congress shifted. So, we had to work hard to keep our people together, to move an agenda for the American people, a better agenda for our children and our grandchildren. It was tough to do, but we didn't lose many votes.
Mr. Speaker, today in talking with one of the people around Vice President Gore, he said if the Vice President wins, he made a bold prediction and said the Patient's Bill of Rights will pass in a lame duck session of Congress. Is that the way you see it if the election were to fall to the Vice President?
Well, we passed a Bill of Rights for patients in the House. We passed one in 1998. And
well, he's clearly talking
about
the one the Democrats preferred.
Well, we'll see.
All right, Mr. Speaker, we appreciate your joining us from Aurora, Illinois. It's late there, or I should say early there in the morning. It's early here, but we all want to keep a close watch on these results. Thank you very much.
Maybe not so early in the morning before I had time we will see how all this works out. So it's good to be with you.
Are you hearing anything we're not hearing?
No, it's just pretty. We're waiting for Florida.
All right. Dennis Hastert, the Speaker of the House. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Judy, that conversation you had with the Speaker should remind us of a word that has not been heard for a very long time: impeachment. I mean, to think that a presidential election could have been conducted about a year and a half or a little less than 2 years after the president was impeached, amazing. Bernard Shaw, sir?
We have a call. Let's go out to the Show Me State, Missouri, in that Senate race in which a dead man, Governor Mel Carnahan, is on the ballot. CNN is calling this for Mel Carnahan. His widow, as you know, agreed to run. And Mel Carnahan, his memory, and those who support him have defeated, turning out Senator John Ashcroft, a first-term Republican senator. What a development. Kate Snow, let's go quickly to Kate Snow in St. Louis.
Bernie, I think you can hear the crowd here. They've got CNN on in the background, and with your announcement, a lot of excitement here. Mrs. Carnahan spoke to this crowd just a short time ago. She talked about carrying on the fire, carrying on her husband's dreams. She, of course, has not been very public in this whole campaign. In fact, voters here in Missouri only saw Mrs. Carnahan a very few times throughout this race over the last 3 weeks since the death of her husband. They saw her in one ad that aired on local television here. They saw her in her announcement last week when she decided that, yes, she would take the position if the votes were to go to her husband. But other than that, they haven't seen much of Mrs. Carnahan. She is right now at home with two of her daughters in Rolla, Missouri. That's about an hour and a half south of where we are in St. Louis. This race has been close all night long. Senator John Ashcroft just a short time ago telling his supporters that they could go home now, that he would have more news for them in the morning. We don't expect to hear from him again anytime soon. Again, very good news for the Democrats here in Missouri, especially in light of the fact that George W. Bush seems to have won this battleground state. Bernie?
Kate, even though she didn't campaign per se that much, she did put up one ad, did she not, within the past 7 days?
She did. Last week, she started running one ad where she talked straight into the camera, a very personal kind of ad, talking about her remembrance of her husband and talking about her goals for Missouri. She does not have a public record. She has not served in public office, but she has been very vocal about the kinds of issues that she wanted to take to Washington. She's talked about education, about women's issues, about children. She's talked about reforming Social Security and some other issues, tax cuts, targeted tax cuts. So she has said all along that she carries her husband's mantle and that she wanted to take that to Washington. Bernie?
Kate, it's Jeff Greenfield. Kate, we know that Mrs. Carnahan and the Carnahan people adopted that slogan, keep the fire going, but we've heard that some Republicans were threatening a legal challenge on the ground that a dead person is not an inhabitant of the state, which Missouri law requires. Can you tell us anything about whether they intend to pursue that legal challenge?
I've asked that question all night. They will not comment on what kind of legal challenge they might mount. But I might add, Jeff, that in addition to the constitutional question, there's been a lot of local news here tonight about the polling places and about the numbers coming in and people being allowed to vote or not allowed to vote. The Republicans voicing some concerns. They say that they think there has been some potential fraud here in St. Louis, in the city of St. Louis. You'll recall that they kept the polls open a little bit late tonight because a judge earlier in the day, a state judge, ruled in favor of the Democrats, who had argued that they needed a little more time because some of their folks hadn't been able to vote. There's been a lot of back and forth today about whether there were any irregularities. I would expect that we might hear more about this tomorrow. Jeff?
Kate, are the Carnahan people banking on the fact that when this woman goes to Washington, Senate Republicans have already indicated the obvious, that they control the rules of the seating in the Senate? Are the Democrats and the Carnahan supporters banking on the fact that who is going to throw a widow out of the Senate seat? Who's going to refuse to seat this woman?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the last part of your question.
Are the Carnahan supporters banking on the fact that it's unlikely the Republicans would want to take on all the public relations heat if they would not let this woman take this seat?
Bernie, it's too loud in here. I'm sorry. I just simply can't hear
Well, we'll call timeout, and we'll call timeout, and thank you in that cheering ballroom. Judy?
All right. We've, as Bernie said, we've called Missouri for the late Governor Carnahan, and as Bernie's been pointing out and as Kate's been discussing, it is his widow who has said that she will accept a seat if appointed. Let's go over to our balance of power area to Wolf Blitzer for some examination of this and some other Senate, House, and governor's races. Wolf.
Judy, with the call for the late Mel Carnahan to be the winner in Missouri, let's take a look at the balance of power in the Senate as it now stands. Coming into this evening, there were 35 Republican holdovers, 31 Democratic holdovers. The Republicans so far tonight have won 14 Senate seats. The Democrats have won 17 seats. That brings the new number of Republicans with 49 seats. The Democrats now have 48 seats. There are still three undecided seats that we'll talk about in a moment. But only a little while ago, before this call by CNN in favor of Mel Carnahan, Mrs. Jean Carnahan did speak out. She had some emotional words on a speakerphone. I want you to listen to what she had to say a little while ago.
Lincoln never saw his nation made whole again. Susan B. Anthony never cast a vote. Martin Luther King Jr. never finished his mountaintop journey. My husband's journey was stopped short, too. And for reasons we don't understand, the mantle has now fallen upon us. We remain heirs of a legacy, bearers of a dream. On this night, I pledge to you, rather, let us pledge to each other, we will never let the fire go out. God bless you always. Thank you.
This is Jean Carnahan, the widow of Mel Carnahan, speaking out a little while ago. Let's go back to the national desk in Bernard Shaw.
Thank you, Wolf, because we're making a call in Iowa, in the Hawkeye state. CNN declares that Al Gore has won Iowa's 7 electoral votes. When we last reported, this was how the electoral map looked, but now if you add Iowa's 7, Mr. Gore now has gone back on top. The vice president with 249 electoral votes to Governor Bush's 246.
And we can now say with absolute certainty, I believe, that unless one of these states that we've called changes, whoever wins Florida will be the next president of the United States.
That's right.
And the states still outstanding: Florida, 25 electoral votes. Here you see it. Oregon, 7 electoral votes. And the Badger State, Wisconsin, 11 electoral votes. It's that close in this country.
But the key here is Oregon and Wisconsin, no offense to those good people, are now irrelevant. The only way either George Bush or Al Gore gets to be president is to win Florida, and Florida looks like it is going down to the very thinnest of wires. This thing literally could not be any closer. Florida is the ballgame.
And we are told it's South Florida, Dade, and Broward counties where the vote is yet to be counted.
Yep.
Well, I suppose it could be closer if the states had fallen a different way and we were facing a tie, 269 to 269. But that's not what's happened.
National raw vote.
Here is a look at, with 85% of the precincts reporting across the nation, look at how close this election is. 49% George Bush, Al Gore 48%. What is it? Who's good at math? That's about 600,000.
It's a 603,000 vote plurality for Bush out of 85.83 million votes cast. Humphrey and Nixon were a shade closer, although we don't know that this could close. Kennedy,
does anybody have a calculator? Can they tell us what that is? We still have 15% of the precincts.
It's way under 1% of the vote.
It's way under 1%, yeah.
But slowly it's changing, and who knows in the coming minutes.
Not quite as close as Kennedy and Nixon, but it's still very, very close.
I want to ask, one of the states we're waiting for is Oregon. Bill, we've been saying all night that Oregon's the one state in the country where they're mailing in the ballots, in some cases delivering them today. How long before we know about Oregon? It's a different counting thing there.
Well, it is supposed to count pretty quickly, but apparently the vote is very close there. And, I mean, they haven't ever had, I think, a presidential election with an all-mail-in ballot. They're supposed to count the ballots as soon as the polls close, so to speak, today. They were supposed to go right away. So we should have a result from Oregon pretty soon. Washington is the state that's supposed to be slow, and we've already called Washington.
And we've already called that. Oregon, as we've mentioned, Wisconsin. We've been looking at these state-by-state numbers throughout the night. They are very close. They reflect the closeness in the presidential.
But as I say,
contest.
they move off
Florida.
center stage now, and
That's
we are
right.
now, since Judy Woodruff is one of the leading experts on the nicknames, I think I know this one. Is it the Sunshine State, Miss Woodruff?
It is.
Well, the sun's going to shine on either Al Gore or George W. Bush, maybe even in the middle of the night, because whoever gets that gets...
That's a good way to put it.
Gets the whole enchilada.
And you know what? When they figure out Florida, there's going to be an argument over who did it. Was it Joe Lieberman or was it Elian Gonzalez who carried Florida?
Oh, boy.
Could be either way.
There was, we all remember the time right after the Elian Gonzalez saga when Florida was just written off for Al
That's right.
Gore.
Everyone assumed...
The political consensus was no way.
That's right.
He
He
might
couldn't
as well
carry
give
Florida.
up. There's no chance.
Because the Cuban-American vote was going to go solidly Republican as it used to be. But from the exit poll we just showed you, that doesn't seem to be happening. The Jewish vote appears to be about as Democratic as it's always been and in about the same proportions as it's always been.
And just for the record, I mean, it is 2 o'clock in the morning, and we should just put this on the table again. If the popular vote keeps holding up, with a narrow, very narrow plurality for Governor Bush, it is now at about 600,000 votes out of 85.8 million votes cast, and Al Gore wins Florida, Al Gore is the President of the United States, having lost the popular vote. That is a very much a live possibility.
We have a voice we haven't heard from yet this evening. He's Robert George. He's a political analyst joining us from New York. Robert, you've been listening to our pontificating and our analyzing. Please bring us a fresh perspective on all this.
Well, you know, it's good to be in the city that never sleeps, covering the election that never sleeps. So I think actually, Judy, you mentioned the name that hadn't been mentioned much, and it's Elian Gonzalez, because while initially Florida was kind of written off because of the Elian Gonzalez affair, it's still possible that there could have been some swing Cuban voters that may have gravitated closer to Bill Clinton in 1996 when he won the state that may have gone Republican, and that's part of the section of Florida that we're looking at results coming in.
We have been talking tonight, Robert, about the Cuban Americans, second and third generation Cuban Americans, not as Republican as their elders. Also the fact that much of the Hispanic vote in the state of Florida is no longer, can we assume it's all Cuban or mostly Cuban. There are more and more Hispanics in Florida who have come from different parts of Central America, South America.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, in fact, my mother actually lives just outside of Dade County, and you're right. It's a mixture of a lot of Caribbean Hispanics, not just the Dominican Republic and so forth, plus West Indians in there as well. You've got an interesting mix of different ethnicities, and it's really hard to say whether they're going to be going Republican or going Democrat, and Florida is the whole marbles basically come down to Florida.
Well, wouldn't it be something if the presidential election came down to the Cuban-American vote in the state of Florida, not to mention, as Bill Schneider is sitting here smiling broadly at me, the senior vote in the state of Florida, and to a degree the Jewish vote in the state of Florida.
And blacks.
Yeah,
and African-Americans, exactly.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it really is it's a microcosm of all of the different kinds of identity politics that we've been battling over the last few years. And I think it's fascinating. We talked a little bit about the fact that impeachment hadn't been discussed much through this campaign, but I really do think it's interesting that Bill Clinton, who is arguably the most divisive president this country has had since Richard Nixon, has part of his legacy is leaving the country even more divided in the most closely contested presidential election in at least 30 years, maybe 40 years.
You mean in the sense that this election is so split, as you say, split the country right down the middle in terms of electoral and popular votes?
Well, I think so. I think Bill Schneider mentioned earlier on that part of the vote that normally would be going Democrat are female seniors, and they're the ones who may have been most offended by Bill Clinton's behavior, and they're also the ones who may also have been put off by the whole question of Gore's embellishments and exaggerations and so forth that may have reminded them a little bit too much of Bill Clinton. So I think that Clinton factor that Clinton factor can't be ignored.
I just want to jump in. We were talking about the Latinos in Dade and Broward counties and their impact. Non-Cubans. Let's put some faces on these people. We're talking about Peruvians, Colombians, Ecuadorians. We're talking about Panamanians, Salvadorians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, Chileans, and Brazilians.
Oh, right. You've got a gumbo. It's a real mixed bag. And I think one of the things we're going to find is that, as actually can also be said for the African American community, the entire Hispanic community, quote unquote, isn't going to be thinking all alike, and you're not going to make exactly the same kind of political messages or overtures to them as you would just one specific group.
Robert, can we go back to New York, your home state or adopted home state, and talk a little bit about Hillary Clinton? You write for the New York Post, right?
That would be correct.
Now, I think it's fair to say that the editorial page of the Post held Mrs. Clinton in minimum high regard.
That's the perfect phrase for
okay. So is it any more complicated than the two factors that Al Gore took the state by a landslide proportion, and that Rick Lazio was not the formidable foe that a Rudy Giuliani would have been, or is there some other thing you want to put in the mix?
I think those are definitely the top. Those are definitely the top two. I think Rick Lazio was in a sense handicapped by having the late start. He ended up having to obviously do a lot of fundraising, which was successful, but he wasn't able to do maybe as much campaigning. There are already recriminations going on among Republicans about why he didn't do this, why he didn't do that. So there were definitely some strategic problems that are in there as well. But I will, give. Maybe it's just because of the late hour and I'm losing my mind. But I'll give Hillary Clinton, a little bit of credit. I mean, she did work hard. She went upstate and campaigned up there a lot, and she made a lot of inroads in what is usually a traditionally Republican area of the state. So give the first lady that, and her success is also, I guess, in one sense, another part of the legacy of Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton is still very, very popular in this state. He ran around. Bad choice of words, excuse me. He came into New York City. He came into New York City and did a lot of heavy campaigning for Mrs. Clinton over the weekend, and the crowds loved him. It really energized her base, their base, and she's now Senator-elect Clinton. Interestingly enough, since the Congress is inaugurated. The Congress is sworn in about 2.5 weeks before the president is. We'll have a situation where Bill Clinton will still be president, and Senator Clinton will be in office for 3 weeks simultaneously.
All kinds of history being made
Indeed.
this election day. Robert George, joining us from New York, we thank you very much, and especially for joining us at this late hour or early hour, depending on your perspective. Well, there are 47 states in the District of Columbia that have come in, have been counted. There are still 3 states hanging out there. When we come back, we're going to take another look, a close look at those states, why they're still out, and where they stand. We'll be right back.
Individually, they are standouts in their respect.
This is a national sales alert from Dodge. Effective immediately for 5 full years. Get 0 APR on 2000 Dodge Stratus and Intrepid, 0.9 APR on 2000 Dodge Dakota and Durango, and 4.9 APR on select all-new 2001 Dodge Caravans. See your Dodge dealer immediately, as 60-month financing can save you over $5,600.
See the friendly Dodge dealer near you.
pharmaceutical company researcher. My area specialty is women's health. We're looking at all ages of a woman's life, developing better medicines for the diseases we've already started on: osteoporosis, Alzheimer's disease, and breast cancer. I really love what I do. My hope for the future is that we develop new medicines for women that let them enjoy healthier, active lives.
Chris was like my shadow. She was always there. For 3 years, she'd drive down from her job at Kraft to 2.
George Bush, governor of Texas, will become the 43rd president of the United States. At 18 minutes past 2 o'clock Eastern Time, CNN declares that George Walker Bush has won Florida's 25 electoral votes, and this should put him over the top.
That's right, Bernie. With Florida, he gets 271 electoral votes, one more than he needs. What happens in Oregon and Wisconsin now becomes irrelevant unless by some remarkable miracle some state changes course. This was the closest election, electorally it looks like, perhaps in this century. Yeah. But George Bush has been declared by CNN the next president of the United States.
And if Al Gore takes Wisconsin and Oregon, he will win by 1 electoral vote. That's only happened once that I know of, and that was 1876.
George Walker Bush, the second son of a president to be elected president in his own right, coming after John Quincy Adams, who ran, almost 200 years ago.
And one person in the Bush family who's taken this hardest, this cliffhanger atmosphere, has been George Herbert Walker Bush. Yes. He has been just so uptight these past couple weeks, and these past few days, the last few hours.
You could see it earlier tonight, you know, when we went up to the hotel suite, and he was sitting there, Governor Bush was sitting there with his wife and with his mother Barbara and his father, the president. The President George Bush looked very worried at that moment.
I think anybody who's a parent knows that you suffer more with the travails of your children than you do for your own. In 1992, George Bush was defeated by Bill Clinton. There are those who believe that that defeat rankled. How could the man who led us to the Gulf War be ousted by a governor of Arkansas? And in this sense, George Walker Bush may represent a kind of restoration. He has defeated the man Bill Clinton wanted to be his heir in the White House. Once again, a vice president of the United States fails an election, but once again, just as with Nixon in 60 and 68, by the closest of margins.
Now, what's interesting about this victory is, of course, that the times in the country are good. We've got peace, we've got prosperity, the crime rate is down. People very strongly approve the job the incumbent Democratic president is doing, and all of the forecasting models said it should have been an easy win for Al Gore. Bush has won by a very narrow margin, but yet he beat very serious odds to win this election. And I think Bill Clinton's problems have a lot to do with it.
No question about this. This is absolute redemption for the former President Bush. You remember this summer he talked about the fact that if the Democrats and Clinton got too personal in their criticism, he, former President Bush, would come out and start saying things. And very so subtly, early on in the campaign, Governor Bush talked about restoring dignity and to the White House. And in the last 72 hours, you've heard that theme again, Jeff.
Pause for one other second. Think of the two men who have run tonight on their 40th birthdays. Al Gore, United States Senator, having run for president. George Bush, a businessman who woke up on his 40th birthday and decided to give up drinking. Al Gore, 24 years in Washington. George Walker Bush, the son who was not supposed to even be in public life, and he is tonight elected president.
Just 5 years ago, he was the managing partner of the Texas Rangers baseball team. And then he was elected governor of the state of Texas. He gave up running a baseball team in order to run a state. And, you know, much has been made of the fact that Texas has a weak governor system. This is not a governor with a great deal of power in his own right. That well may be, but it's a state with a lot of people. He turned out to be a very popular governor in that state, and the Republican eyes across this country have been on him literally since the day he was elected governor, took office, I should say, in 1995.
That's right, and he's going to go to Washington with a Republican House of Representatives. Right now, the Senate has not been decided, but he may have a Republican Senate, which means that for the first time in almost 50 years, we could have a situation where the Republicans control the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the White House. Let's just be careful about that because irrational exuberance could take over.
Candy Crowley is in Victory City, Austin, Texas.
Bernie, I got to tell you that this crowd outside the Austin State House, you were looking at the diehards here. This crowd was about twice as big earlier in the evening. I have to tell you, it has been pouring rain. It is cold enough to see your breath in Austin, Texas. I was in Green Bay yesterday, and it was warmer there than it is here this evening. This crowd has been rained on. They have cheered every state that went for Bush. They have gone through every emotion known to man. They had, you know, a time when it looked like they'd lost Florida, and, you know, it seemed to swing sort of towards the vice president. The crowd got very quiet. Florida was put back into play, and from then on, every single state that went, they cheered. So you are looking at diehard Bush fans. It's good to come home when this sort of thing happens because you've got a crowd like this that'll still wait up for you. We are told that as of yet, George Bush has no reaction. We do know that he has been spending this evening in the governor's mansion with his brother Jeb, his father, his mother, while they have been watching the events unfold. We were told at one point the atmosphere was nervous, but we have been told all along that George Bush was feeling serene about the race he ran, that whatever happened, he felt that his campaign gave it a good go. Tonight, again, you are looking at Austin, some of them who have been waiting here literally for 9 and 10 hours to see their favorite son make good, and it looks like they have. You see that sign? Thanks, Jeb. I have to tell you, Jeb was in the, as I said, in the governor's mansion with Governor Bush tonight, the two governors Bush. George Bush had been saying along the campaign trail for the last couple of weeks, well, if I don't win Florida, that Thanksgiving turkey is going to be pretty cold. So Thanksgiving dinner apparently is safe now for Jeb Bush. He can join the family in Kennebunkport, no doubt. This has got to be an incredible moment for that family.
Well, and what may make it even sweeter, Candy, is that we can report to you that it's a trifecta tonight. The Republicans, CNN is calling that the Republicans do retain control of the United States Senate based on victory we're calling in Montana for the incumbent Republican, Senator Conrad Burns. The challenger, Brian Schweitzer, he has set back the Democrat. This is, as Bill Schneider's been pointing out throughout the evening, the last time when the Republicans ended up in control of the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Dwight Eisenhower was in the White House. It was 1952. They then subsequently lost control of the House and the Senate 2 years later, but for 2 years, they had all three.
And now they've controlled the House and Senate since the election of 1994. They came to power in 1995, and they've kept it ever since then, which is quite remarkable.
One thing we should point out, just to do the arithmetic, the reason why we know the Republicans will control the Senate is that the best the Democrats can do is to get to 50-50. And with the election of George Walker Bush, it means that Dick Cheney, the vice president, breaks any tie in the Senate. So that's where we are now.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that Mr. Schneider is going to be using the words irrational exuberance as a warning to the Republicans. Yes. I have a feeling. I think what we heard from Speaker Hastert and Trent Lott was some words of restraint, that even if the Republicans control all three of these institutions, there may be a certain degree of rational non-exuberance because of the narrowness.
Imagine the religious right. Imagine the gun owners. They're waiting for the Republicans to deliver, and for years they've been saying, but we need the White House. We need the White House. Now they have no excuse.
We have a race to call. The Senate race in the state of Nebraska goes to Ben Nelson, the Democrat. He defeats the Republican Don Stenberg. This means the Democrats hold on. This is the seat of retiring Senator Bob Kerrey. It is a hold, a retention, if you will, for the Democrats. We now have a Bill Nelson in the Senate from Florida and a Ben Nelson from Nebraska. You got that?
Yes, and it means that the Democrats have at least 49 seats in the Senate, and if Debbie Stabenow beats Spencer Abraham in Michigan, the Senate will break 50-50, and Vice President Cheney will break the tie.
And we should say, we haven't mentioned Dick Cheney's name in the last few minutes. We are projecting, estimating, calling the next Vice President of the United States 59-year-old Richard Bruce Cheney, born in the state of Nebraska, but grew up and hails now from the state of Wyoming. And he's been Secretary of Defense. He's been White House Chief of Staff. He knows Washington.
Which is why he's on the ticket. Because George Bush has never worked in Washington except through association with his father.
Let's go out to Nashville, Tennessee. Our man, our senior White House correspondent, John King, is there beneath an umbrella. Bush, 271, the magic number, John.
Well, Bernie, the glum faces here in this crowd, much like us in Texas, the hardy here waiting in the rain, and their cheers started to go up when we showed the gap closing in Florida, but then on the big screen behind us where they have been showing some of the network broadcasts tonight, including our own from time to time, when the election was called for Governor Bush, there were gasps of no and screams of no, the faces quite glum. The organizers of this event quickly turned off the news broadcast and put the music back on. And just a moment ago, they announced that Alan Tipper Gore will be here about 15 minutes from now. No word from the Gore campaign yet. We've tried making a few phone calls on exactly what they plan to say, but we will hear from the Vice President, we're told, in about 15 minutes here. The atmosphere obviously quite depressing here. The Vice President himself had said this morning at 5 a.m. at Tampa that he thought it would come down to the state of Florida. As the results came in, a bit of a roller coaster, much like this entire night. The Vice President originally projected to win Florida, then obviously the state slipped away in the results, and barring some sort of legal challenge, it appears Al Gore has fallen just short, something many of his advisors worried about in the final few days. A man, the son of a legendary senator of this state, served 8 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate, 8 years as Vice President, was seemingly ready to step out of the shadow of not only his father, but also of Bill Clinton. Within the Gore campaign, already complaints that he was heard on the left from Ralph Nader, and on the right, if you will, among conservative Democrats, conservative elderly voters, by Bill Clinton's character problems. Others already questioning the Gore campaign strategy. You can see the faces here in Nashville tonight. Quite a depressing crowd here as they wait to hear from the Vice President. And the mood here has gone up and down all night. Right now, these people seem to be in shock as they sit in a very cold rain waiting to hear from Al Gore.
John, it's Jeff Greenfield. You know, it occurs to me that 30 years ago tonight, on election night, Al Gore Sr. lost the seat that he had held in Tennessee, and that apparently for much of Al Gore's life, maybe from birth, it was the parents' dream that he would ascend to the job that Al Gore Sr. had wanted and never could get to. From your own sense, losing this close, coming this far, after all the years that Al Gore had wanted to be president, my own suspicion is that this would be much worse a night than if it had been a sizable, early predictable loss. What's your sense of that?
Well, certainly in a night to question why the Vice President could not do what the President has done. For all the criticism of Bill Clinton, he was able to carry some states in the South. This state, Tennessee, twice. Arkansas, twice. Louisiana, Kentucky. Al Gore, painted by George W. Bush as a traditional liberal, not even able to carry all of the Dukakis states, with Oregon going to Governor Bush, or at least being in a lead for Governor Bush right now. Remarkable that a son of the South, a Tennessee senator who was a member of the Democratic Leadership Council, being painted as a liberal by Governor Bush and losing this election, losing his own state in the process, his own home state.
John, I wanted to ask you, it's Phil Schneider. Are you hearing from any of the Gore supporters down there, if only he had used Bill Clinton more, he might have won this race?
Within the Gore campaign, very few people say that. They had unified around a strategy based largely on polling and focus groups done by their pollsters that Bill Clinton hurt them among swing voters in places like Michigan and in places like Pennsylvania. But we did hear from Ed Rendell, the Democratic National Committee chairman, tonight. He was furious. He said they should have sent Bill Clinton at least home to Arkansas for several days. They lost those 6 electoral votes, and they perhaps, Mr. Rendell said, should have sent him somewhere else. There was a lot of criticism of Al Gore throughout this campaign, dating all the way back to the early primaries. People thought he overreacted to the Bill Bradley challenge by moving left. Then his comments about Elian Gonzalez drew criticism. His performance in the debates drew criticism. Of course, his convention was praised, as was the selection of Senator Joseph Lieberman. There's great disappointment in the Democratic ranks tonight that a vice president running on an enormously popular economic agenda of this president anyway. 22 million new jobs, 4% unemployment, enormous frustration in the party if these results hold up, that the vice president could not hold the White House for the Democrats on such a remarkable economic record.
John, we've been talking about Ralph Nader through at least part of this evening. Will there be fingers pointed in that direction, or is it clear, looking at least what looks like this result is going to be, that there were forces bigger than the Green Party at work here?
Well, I don't think you can singularly blame Ralph Nader, but already within the Gore campaign, they are pointing the finger at Ralph Nader. If you look at the results in Oregon, the results in Florida, if say the vice president received half of the Nader votes in Florida, we would have perhaps a different result, or at least a chance of a different result. So certainly they will point fingers at Ralph Nader. There has been a pointing of fingers, if you will, at Bill Clinton the entire time of the Gore campaign. People saying that had it not been for the president's personal failings, that this would have been a shoo-in from the beginning because of the economic record. As you were just mentioning, somewhat remarkable that we will have a Republican president and a Republican Congress. If you look through the polling, the voters in this country say that they tend to favor the Democrats, in some cases by substantial margins, when you rattle through the big issues in this election. So the Republicans facing a challenge here as well, and already there will be speculation about who will lead the Democrats. We haven't spoken much about this because it's in bad taste, but in this past week, many Democrats have already begun talking among their own consultants about the next presidential election, should Al Gore lose. We're told by Democratic sources, Senator Lieberman has had conversations about it. Senator Christopher Dodd of Connecticut. Obviously, one man who looks right now to be the Democrats' leader would be Dick Gephardt of Missouri. He leads a minority in the House. He's run for president before, thought about challenging Al Gore and decided not to. He must be thinking again tonight. He's a very lonely man in Washington.
John, has anyone mentioned the name Hillary Rodham Clinton, who is now the United States Senator from New York and probably the Democrat with the widest national following now that Al Gore is not going to be president?
People in our business mention it quite a lot, Bill, because obviously of the attention she would draw as a candidate. She herself has said she has no plans to do that. But obviously, if these results hold in the days that follow, Democrats will be looking around for a standard bearer. I think Mrs. Clinton would be quick to try to dampen such speculation and make the case that she wants to be New York Senator. Perhaps a year or two from now, people will come and make a run at her, but I view that as pretty unlikely right now.
All right, John King there under the umbrella in Nashville, where the rain is certainly symbolizing the mood, more than symbolizing the mood of so many people. And as we heard him say, maybe 10 minutes we'll hear from Al Gore. Back to Austin, Texas quickly to Candy Crowley. Candy, the crowd seems to be getting bigger again.
Yes, the crowd is thinner now. It's been raining here, but here the weather doesn't match the mood. Let me give you what little I know about what's going on in the governor's mansion in the past couple of minutes. The governor is there with his brother, the other Governor Bush from Florida, as well as with his father, the former president, and there are a variety of spouses. We are told by an aide everyone is very excited, as you might imagine, that Governor Bush is going around thanking his staff. Quote, it's a very happy moment. You bet it is for the Bush family, and of course for these Austin residents and those from surrounding towns who have been been here about 9 hours waiting for a moment just like this. Judy?
Candy, in talking with Karl Rove earlier today, I know I was struck. I said, you know, if Governor Bush wins, what is this a testament to thinking he would say something about the kind of campaign that was run? And he said it would be an extraordinary testament to a guy with amazing powers of persuasion and somebody who shouldn't have won, given peace, given prosperity, and the fact that the Democrats should have been reaping the rewards of that.
Look, it is a testament to something, first of all, a very well-run campaign which admits to making some mistakes, but on the whole was very steady about the issues that this governor wanted to talk about, was very steady in their strategy, which they put into place 17 months ago, which they then carried out over the last 2 weeks exactly as they planned it 17 months ago. Having said all that, with peace and prosperity, this is an amazing outcome. that a 6-year governor from the state of Texas has been able to grasp the presidency for the Republicans, something they've been waiting for now for almost 8 years. Yes, what has been said about George Bush all along, what is apparent on the trail and in some of these election results, is that this is a man who prides himself on being able to bring both sides together. If we heard "I'm a uniter, not a divider" once, we heard it a million times along this campaign trail. It was one of his major themes. That is, you know, you don't like the bickering, I can end it, look what I've done in Texas. So obviously that is one of the themes that had appeal.
Candy, this is it's Jeff Greenfield. Once again, an outsider has beaten an insider. Every time since John Kennedy, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, except for Michael Dukakis, it's always happened. Do they now think, or have they been thinking for a while, that the fresh start theme, the independence theme, not just the fact that I'm not from Washington, but that I can redo the climate of Washington, was what may have made the difference in terms of his appeal?
They absolutely think they can change things. I mean, if there's one thing we also know about this campaign, this is a governor that is very comfortable with his own skills at being able to get along with people. This is also a man who is quite confident. So they go into this really believing they can genuinely change the atmosphere in Washington. And while he may be an outsider, he is no stranger to Washington, as you well know. He came in the final months of his father's last campaign. He has grown up around politics. So while he is an outsider in the elected area, he is certainly not an outsider to the ways of Washington. Has he got a job cut out for him? Absolutely, but they believe he can make some changes in the town.
Candy, two questions. One, if this election, well, it is. I said not if it's close. It has been an extremely close election. Any concern on their part about having less than, I hate this word, a mandate? And second of all, in terms of who he will bring to office, there have been all sorts of hints dropped about Colin Powell. Are there any other names that come to mind?
Well, Condoleezza Rice, who has been one of his foreign policy advisors along the way, I think you'll see some familiar names here. They have surrounded him in the campaign. Those are the advisors on both domestic and international policy. So you'll recognize some of those people. There'll be some new people as well. But while there has been some talk of that, they have been focused on winning this election. I think they want to leave the whole transition and who they're going to pick to a later day, but it's got to start tomorrow. And as far as whether they believe that he'll have any problem with the mandate, one of the things he's also said going around the country is, I want to go before Congress and say, you know, I represent the people and here's what the people want. Is that more difficult to do now? Absolutely. But again, this is a governor that is very confident in his skills of bringing people together. Will he get what he wants? No, I think everybody knew all along that neither Al Gore nor George Bush could go into Washington and say, give me this, and Congress would do it. We've watched Washington too long. That's, of course, why they call it the balance of power. There are three branches of government, and George Bush knows full well they'll have a say in a lot of this.
Candy, a lot of people have said Governor Bush underestimates just how hard it is to deal with a city with two parties as entrenched as they are. You know the Congress as well as anybody we know. You've covered it for a number of years. Does he underestimate it, or does he get it?
I think he gets it, yes. He's watched Congress. He's watched his father in office. He certainly has watched Washington politics over the years. Let me sort of flip that on its ear. Governor Bush is also fond of saying that people underestimate him. So I think, you know, going into this, they're not going to give any ground on I can bring them together. But, you know, Washington, as you know, is a whole nother world. And he's aware that it's there, but being aware it's there and actually experiencing it and trying to get these two sides together, particularly if there is such a close margin in the House and the Senate, that's going to be tough. But they believe he can do it, and you're not going to dissuade them from that tonight.
Candy, do you know when we are going to hear from the governor tonight? Any hints?
We all hope soon, Judy, but I
mean, we can keep talking.
I'm not being told by our producer, Mike Roselli, maybe in about 15 minutes. So, you know.
Would you give him our earnest wishes for a speedy victory?
Not that we don't love the sound of our own voices.
But enough already.
You're being a real trooper, Candy, I have to say, because I know you've been there. Oh, goodness. Is it 12 or 13 hours now?
Oh, who's counting?
Who's counting when you're having fun? Absolutely. One has to assume that there may be phone calls coming the governor's way from all sorts of people, including the Vice President of the United States right now, that may be holding up public statements and so forth.
Absolutely. I'm sure that, you know, as is standard, that you have to wait for some sort of speech from the opposition before you come out here. So there's that, and there's, you know, just getting it together, you know, to go from here to there. When you've got all those people surrounding you, it takes some time.
Bob Novak, you're watching this scene of jubilation from our Washington Bureau. I'm just thinking, listening to Judy and Candy, on this ticket with this successful governor, former Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, and because Florida was so crucial, and because there are many retired veterans down there, I'm just wondering how much the Schwarzkopf, Tampa, Florida connection and the Cheney connection and their hammering on national defense and the deteriorating armed forces might have been a factor.
That might have been a factor, Bernie. I think also there's a lot of little ironies there that at the very end, as the Democrats and the Gore campaign were desperately watching the vote count, the slow vote count in South Florida and Dade County, hoping that in vain that Vice President Gore could overtake the lead by Governor Bush. They lost out in Dade County, and it's quite clear that the vote that put George W. Bush over in Florida and indeed into the White House was the Cuban-American vote in Dade County. Now, the irony of that is that Al Gore got in such trouble with his own party by coming out against the president's position on the Elian Gonzalez case, but it obviously did not do him any good with the Cuban-American voters. Well, I really do think in some way we have to look at the results as they come in, may have decided the next president of the United States.
Bob, I want to, you know, since recrimination is also a blood sport in Washington,
you bet.
I've already started drawing up a list of what the Democrats are going to say is why Gore lost. And the 9 nominees are personality, the debates, both the Clinton scandals casting a shadow over him and not using Clinton enough, going left at the convention, I know that'll be one of your favorites, and another one that the fact that the country's been so prosperous for so long made people believe that they could take the risk with an outsider. Any additions you want to make or subtractions from that list of what Democrats will say about this?
All of the above, and one other addition, which I've heard from a lot of Democrats just in the last couple of days before one single vote was counted, and that is the allegation that Al Gore did not stick to a decided track, to a steady course. One thing about George W. Bush, he wasn't the greatest candidate I've ever seen, but he was steady. He had an agenda that he pursued with a great steadfastness. Al Gore, and this is the criticism by Democrats, he would zig one way this day and another the other day, talk about how bad it was Bush was in Texas. The next day he was on Social Security. It was not a steady course. That would not be my criticism. My criticism is it's very hard, Jeff, for these politicians to get it straight that the American people, given a choice by somebody who is not part of Washington and somebody who is, almost always will take the outsider. The exception, as we know, was in 1988 when Governor Michael Dukakis of Massachusetts was rejected in favor of Vice President Bush, but Dukakis was a really terrible candidate, maybe the worst candidate I've seen. And if political parties are going to be putting up insiders like Al Gore and Bob Dole, they are going to lose because they must get the message some way that the American people, when all other things were in favor of the Democrats this year and all these silly models by the political scientists said it was a sure Democratic win, they still voted no because they don't like the insider.
I wanted to ask Bob Novak a question. Your fellow, you're conservative. The most remarkable thing is that they stayed on board with George Bush. They didn't waver. They didn't give him any trouble. Pat Buchanan disappeared from the entire campaign. Do you find that remarkable?
I think Pat finds it remarkable because he thought he was going to get a tremendous vote from the conservatives who would reject another Bush. I don't believe George W. Bush had to work very hard. He didn't have, as long as he didn't do something silly like saying, gee, I really am pro-choice on abortion and really alienate a whole block of his vote. But they were just saying we had to get rid, we being the Republicans, they're saying they had to get rid of the Clinton-Gore family, get them out of there completely. And there was very little, they gave George W. Bush a lot of leeway. And of course he did come up with he always talked about tax cuts. Every single speech he talked about cutting down the size of government, and that helped secure the base. You know, Bill, a lot of people I've heard tonight saying how hard it's going to be with this closely divided Congress and a narrowly elected president to get anything done. But I will make you a little prediction that one of the first things that will get done is a repeal of the estate tax, because there's a lot of Democrats who are opposed to that, who voted against the president. It passed both houses easily last time, and President Clinton vetoed it. So that is one issue that may not be of great importance to most Americans, but to a minority of Americans, it was one of the most attractive things in the Bush agenda, and I think it's one of the things you're going to find become law very early in this new administration.
The estate tax, known in Bush circles as the death tax. Bob, you know Washington very well. How awkward, how difficult will this governor's transition be to power in Washington?
Well, I think it'll be less awkward than Jimmy Carter's was, less awkward than Bill Clinton's was, in some ways less awkward than Ronald Reagan's was, because there are a lot of people coming in who have been around the track quite often, including a guy named Dick Cheney. We interviewed Dick Cheney on Evans, Novak, Hunt and Shields a couple weeks ago, and asked him if he was going to be he was going to have special duties in national security as vice president. And I thought he would say, well, it wouldn't be proper for me to speculate on that. And instead he said, yes, I'm going to have special duties. I think he's going to be a very major figure in this administration, and as a vice president, unlike Dan Quayle and unlike Spiro Agnew, who in the course of the campaign became embarrassments, I think Dick Cheney became more and more of an asset. So I think that somebody like Cheney, and also everybody expects Colin Powell to be Secretary of State. Be surprised if he isn't. There's no two greater insiders in Washington than General Powell and Mr. Cheney, and so it isn't like a bunch of boys who just got off the turnip truck coming in. I think they're going to be a little more savvy than some of the governors of both parties who have come in the last generation.
Bob, while we're at it, while we're naming names, what about Treasury? What about the White House Chief of Staff?
Well, the Treasury, I don't really know, except I think it's not going to be Lawrence Lindsay, who's former Federal Reserve Chairman. I think he is going to have if they keep the job that was established in the Clinton administration as National Economic Director, I think they'll have that. Republicans like to have a financier or a banker in, and sometimes pretty dull bulbs, and I don't think they have decided who that is going to be. One of the more exotic choices is youngish multi-millionaire from California, Jerry Parsky, who was a state chairman way back when, was a very young Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under Bill Simon in the Nixon administration. That's a possibility. White House Chief of Staff, I hear a lot of names mentioned. I don't think they've made a selection on it. Some trial balloons have been floated for a former Congressman Vin Weber, who supported John McCain against George W. Bush, but then was added to his advisory staff. His name has been mentioned. Andy Card, who was Deputy Chief of Staff under John Sununu in the first Bush administration, has been mentioned. I don't think it's going to be Karl Rove. I don't think that's a job that Karl would like.
We're going to go back to this jubilant scene here. Candy Crowley has a guest.
Hi, Bernie. Yeah, Mark McKinnon. So we call you what? Media guru, right?
Media director.
Okay. Mark, first of all, let me just talk about personally what you went through tonight. I mean, we were up, we were down. What was the move?
It was like 5 life and death experiences. I mean, I really felt like I've been to hell and back on a number of occasions tonight. You know, when Florida went south, I know the governor maintained his optimism, but I got to tell you, a lot of us on the staff, just Florida was key. We knew that from the very beginning. And when Florida went south, we all got involved in some very fuzzy math about how to try and put it together. But we knew we knew we'd have to run the board literally to make it happen without Florida. So it was really devastating when Florida went south. I mean, it was just I mean, the whole campaign went dark, and we really thought it was going to be tough to pull off. And so when the projection came back, they were pulling it back into the undecided column. You know, we all got revived, and then you just can't imagine what it was like in the headquarters, literally watching the margins. You know, we were at 50 to 48%, but literally we're watching 100,000 votes shrink to about a 20,000 vote margin, which I guess is what we won with.
What do you think did it for him? I mean, if you had to, like, pin it down to one thing besides those marvelous ads you put out, what's the one thing that did this for him?
I think it was that the governor got a very fundamental focused message about trusting people versus Al Gore trusting big government. I think that in the end, that message got through. And people looked at Governor Bush and they saw a president. And I think I think the debates were critical. I think the debates, when you look at the tracking and the research, the debates are when the whole thing turned around.
Has anybody in this campaign been looking ahead over the last 48, 62 hours, however long, about, okay, what next?
If they have, it wasn't me. I have no idea. I'm going to go to bed tonight and have a stiff drink here as quickly as I can get off your set.
Well, before you go do that, and they're cheering for you to go have a drink, Mark, so that's really nice. You're I don't know, do we call you a former Democrat now?
I'm a Bush man is what I am. I'm a Bush man.
And what was it that got you from the other side over to Governor Bush?
Well, he was a Republican that was proactive. He was for things instead of against things. You know, he had a bipartisan message. And listen, I was just one of 800,000 Democrats in Texas that crossed the bridge to support him. And then, you know, we saw tonight that a whole lot of other Americans came across the bridge as well.
Darkest time of the campaign?
September. I call it Black September. It was the month of rats, moles, and bad polls. It was a very difficult time. Of course, New Hampshire was tough. We lost South Carolina, but the governor never wavered. He felt from the very beginning it was a long-distance run. He set the pace, and we just followed him throughout. He never, in the darkest times of the campaign, he never wavered. He always thought we were going to pull it out.
Did you ever waver?
Tonight. Oh, I wavered 100 times. Are you kidding me?
Mark McKinnon, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Judy, Bernie?
All right, Candy Crowley, I'm sure that Mark McKinnon was speaking for many people in the crowd when he said what his plans are in the next few minutes after we hear from the Texas governor, and we know he wants to talk. We want to show you who've been watching. Of course, CNN has called the winner, George W. Bush, that he will be the 43rd president of the United States. This is what the popular vote, the raw vote total looks like. With 90% of the precincts reporting, it is still a very close election. 49% George W. Bush, 44,777,000 to Al Gore's 44,432,000. We are talking, what, 45?
You're talking about 350,000
out of
88, 89 million.
You're talking now about a race.
Small percentage.
They're talking about a popular vote margin now that is closer than Nixon and Humphreys. Nixon won by about 500,000 votes. Slightly larger than Kennedy's 110,000 vote margin against Richard Nixon. And I now would like to point out, depending on where this 10% is coming from, that it is not inconceivable that Al Gore will have more popular votes than George Bush.
Which is the opposite of what
everybody
was thinking going into this,
everybody was assuming
election day.
everybody was assuming Bush would win the popular vote, but Gore might win the electoral vote. I will say, some of us pointed out it is possible that it would break the other way. I'm not predicting it will. I'm only saying that as you look at Bush's margin and the popular vote steadily shrinking, and remember, you know, the Gore people were saying, we're going to play by the rules. Whatever the electoral vote says. You may be faced here with a man with 271 electoral votes, President of the United States, getting really no more and maybe a few votes less than the man he defeated.
Well, to help make your case, there are, we are told, approximately 11 million votes out yet to be counted. We do not believe that they will make any difference to the outcome, but we do have 11 million more votes to count. And a margin, as you see right now, of about 350,000.
So about 100 million votes will have been cast.
About that,
This adds up to about 89 million.
That's right, about 100 million votes, which is just a little more than 4 years ago.
So let's understand, if I may just review the bidding for a second at this late hour. We have a president elected, as of now, with one electoral vote more than he needs. We have a popular vote that looks like it may be one of the closest, if not the closest, and could even make the President of the United States a loser in the popular vote. We have elected a former First Lady of the United States, of the United States to the United States Senate, and the people of Missouri have elected a dead man to the United States Senate.
And we are at the dawn of a new millennium. Do you think that has anything to do with all these political historic?
I don't know if it's the harmonic convergence of the planet. I don't know what, but I must tell you, I think the historians are going to look back on this election and say, we ain't seen nothing like it.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the Swallows have come back to Capistrano.
I'll tell you one interesting thing about that election in Missouri. In our exit poll, we asked people, how would you have voted, the voters of Missouri, if there was a choice between Gene Carnahan on the ballot and John Ashcroft? If that were the case, the exit poll showed that John Ashcroft would have won by about 3 points. As it was, Mel Carnahan, her deceased husband, won. What that clearly indicates is they were not voting for his widow. They were voting a vote of sympathy for the deceased governor.
And yet they knew, presumably, that
it was a statement
his widow would be appointed to the seat if he won.
That's right. And what was remarkable is that George Bush carried Missouri, but Gene Carnahan still won. And that's got to be very distressing for John Ashcroft to have lost his state the same day it went for George Bush.
Yeah.
On that note, if you're just joining CNN's coverage, Texas Governor George Bush will be the next president of the United States. He defeated Vice President Gore with 271 electoral votes, one more than the required 270. We are waiting for Vice President Gore. We are waiting for Governor Bush. Meanwhile, we'll be right back. The United States has a new president. He's the Texas Governor, George Walker Bush, who tonight defeated Vice President Al Gore. CNN's White House correspondent John King is in Nashville.
Bernie, CNN is told by two senior Gore campaign officials that the vice president placed a phone call to the Texas governor. The vice president, now in his motorcade, due here in downtown Nashville in just a few minutes to deliver remarks to the supporters left gathered here. We're told he called Governor Bush and congratulated him on winning the election. And in brief remarks here tonight to his supporters and, of course, to the American people, will wish the governor well. We're told the statement will be very brief and that the vice president plans to meet with his senior campaign staff tomorrow. He did wish the small group of aides with him at the Nashville Hotel when the results became clear. He did wish them very well, we're told, and thank them for their help in this election. Obviously a very emotional moment. Many of the most junior members of the staff flowing here now into a pouring rain in Nashville to hear the Vice President Tipper Gore and the Liebermans come to address what they had hoped would be a victory rally. This always the toughest, not only for the candidates, but also for the junior staffers who have never been through something like this and believe all along they are going to win. But again, we are told the Vice President will concede the election in his brief remarks here tonight. His political future up in the air. This is a man who served 8 years in the House, 8 in the Senate, 8 as Vice President, now narrowly losing what he had been his lifelong dream, winning the presidency of the United States. Bernie?
And Joe Lieberman, of course, will retain his seat in the United States Senate. Where is Senator Lieberman?
Senator Lieberman was here in Nashville, and he will come here with the Vice President tonight. He and Hadassah Lieberman, his wife, were at a hotel in downtown Nashville with the Gores, watching the results come in. They were told a short time ago to gather up their group and come on over here.
John, are you hearing any expressions of, we came so close?
Well, certainly, even in the last 48 hours, they were saying that if they lost, that they would come very close. Little margin, no margin for error in their strategy in the final days. Now that, of course, a tribute to Governor Bush and the way he prosecuted this campaign. Already, as we've discussed earlier, some finger pointing at Ralph Nader for drawing away liberal votes from the vice president. And the greatest frustration, of course, throughout the Gore campaign, how should the vice president try to strike the balance between trying to get some credit for the successes of the Clinton administration, but to escape the personal failings and the personal controversies of the president. So, of course, they feel in this campaign that they came very close. Look at the electoral count. But the vice president lost here at home at Tennessee. His aides saying he will have to take responsibility for that, although this state has trended Republican very quickly in the past 6 to 8 years. Bill Clinton's home state of Arkansas gone Republican as well. And again, one of the key differences, the coalition Bill Clinton and Al Gore formed in 1992 and then again in 1996, included a few of those southern states that the Republicans had been successful at in the prior presidential elections, especially in the Reagan years. And we've just been told that the vice president's motorcade has arrived, so we expect to see him in just a few minutes.
Hey, John, it's Jeff Greenfield. Has anyone in the Gore campaign come to grips with the possibility that as we look at the popular vote, that Al Gore might be the one who wins the popular vote but loses the electoral vote?
Well, remember, all week long the speculation has been just the opposite,
right,
that George W. Bush might win. And the people in the Gore campaign consistently said that they believed they would win the popular vote and the presidency because they believed the results as we went west, that he would run up a pretty good margin in California. They believed, and he did carry Washington State. So did they assume, they have assumed all along the possibility that he would win the popular vote, but as they assumed that, they assumed he would win the presidency if he did so. Never in our discussions this week did anybody in the Gore campaign say, you know, we're a little worried we might win the popular vote and not the Electoral College. They thought they would go hand in hand, especially because they thought he would win California, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York. It appears he will win all those states. They were hoping for Florida. That's the other big one. So they thought that if they won the Electoral College, they would do so by winning big enough in those big states, even though they would win fewer states. They knew that all along. They thought they'd win big enough to win both.
They were also telling some people, you know, they're ready for a popular vote loss because, by God, this is what the Founding Fathers had in mind. There's got to be some exquisite irony. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the numbers look like it could happen the other way.
It could happen the other way, and if that happens, and there will be anyway, the what-ifs. What is the 1 or 2 states we could have done? And again, if you look at this very close electoral map, if they had turned Tennessee's 11 electoral votes around, West Virginia elected a Democratic governor tonight, unseating a Republican, yet Al Gore lost the state that had voted Democratic in 8 of the last 10 presidential elections. States like Iowa came his way, or it appears it will come his way, but very close at the end. So there will be a lot of questioning as to why Al Gore could not run stronger in traditionally Democratic states, and why a man from Tennessee could not do at least a little bit better in the southern and border states.
All right, John King, there in Nashville, you said the motorcade with the vice president has arrived, so we're going to be keeping a close eye on you. We'll come back to Nashville as soon as the vice president is ready to speak. But right now, we want to go back to Austin, where Candy Crowley is with another of Governor Bush's media people. Candy?
I am, Judy, but let me first give you a little information about the phone call between the vice president and Governor Bush. I'm told that it took place about 2:30 this morning Eastern time. The vice president, of course, congratulated the governor. The governor said to the vice president that he was a formidable opponent and a good man. He then said, we gave them, meaning the American people, a cliffhanger. Bush also told the vice president, I understand that this is hard, and told him to be sure and give Mrs. Gore his best. So that's what we know about the phone call, which took place between the vice president and the governor just a little over a half an hour ago. Let me now talk and turn to Stu Stevens, media consultant for the Bush campaign. So how many emotions did you go through tonight?
Oh, about 4,000, up and down. But Carl was steady as a rock and kept it in.
And was there a point when you thought it's over?
No. I mean, the Florida always looked good. And the scenario for us to win with Florida was always there.
If you had to look back over the last 17 months and find a turning point when you thought this is it, he's gonna become president, was there one?
The debates. He entered the debate slightly behind. It was the linchpin of the Gore strategy to win the debates and disqualify the governor. And the governor won every debate decisively.
And yet you had that September was a very sort of dark time for you. Did you feel like the debates turned that around then?
Yeah, it was a turning point in the campaign.
If there's a single quality, single issue, what was it that you think turned this ever so slightly, very small edge for the governor?
I think that now President-elect Bush has a remarkable ability to connect with people and to relate to them. And I think that and his promise to change the tone and to really elevate the tone of politics in America, people responded to. And that was a consistency. He said it when he announced in Iowa last June, and he said it last night in Austin.
So tell the truth, have any of you all been talking about transition, moving to Washington, any of that stuff for the last couple of days?
I may be the only one, but no one, I don't think so. No.
But there was an awful lot of confidence in this campaign over the last couple of days that some of us thought was beyond the empirical evidence that we saw. How much of that was real and how much of that was you've just got to have that confidence going in the last 2 days and send out that signal?
Well, I've learned the Texans are a confident bunch.
Okay, and certainly this governor is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Stu Stevens, media consultant for the Bush campaign. Back to you in Atlanta.
Thank you, Candy. As John King indicated, Vice President Al Gore's motorcade has arrived there outside the campaign headquarters in Nashville. The crowd is assembled. John says that Mr. Gore will likely make a very brief statement. Senator Joe Lieberman, the wives of both candidates will be with them. And then presumably after that's done, Governor Bush will appear in Austin, and we will have heard from both these men tonight in a very historic race.
That it certainly has been, and certainly the counting of the votes has almost been historic. I want to have our viewers and us take a quick look here at the state that turned the corner for George W. Bush, the state of Florida. Here it is with 99% of the precincts reporting. Look at those numbers. George W. Bush, right, about, 11,000 votes ahead out of, 5.6 million?
Almost 6 million votes. You got, this is 1976 all over again, where Jimmy Carter won Ohio by a margin of about 10 or 11,000 votes, won Mississippi by about 15,000 votes, and that was the presidency. You're talking about less than an 11,000 vote margin at a 5.6 million votes.
And let's look at the Nader vote if we have it.
Look at the Nader vote. That's what I'm curious about.
We have it.
In the state of Florida. We have it, whether we can pull it up right now. Here
it is. Wow.
All right, 95,000.
11,000 vote margin for Bush, and Nader gets 95,000 votes. I think one of the fingers of recrimination is going to be pointed at Ralph Nader.
Now,
and he doesn't care.
Just quickly, I know, Jeff, you want to say anything. Bill, of the 99% reporting, does that include absentee and all these other things that we said were hanging out there that we didn't know about for so long?
I believe it does. I don't want to be held to that, but I believe it does.
So the 1% we haven't heard from is going to be it. I mean, that's going to...
When we have 100%, that is supposed to be it.
No, but you know what I mean. I mean, when the absentees over and above.
Yeah, well, they count the absentees, precinct county by county, and they report them along with the returns from the people who actually voted.
Just want to point out that if based on what we have found, or what you have found, you and your team, about the Nader vote, breaking about 6-1 for Bush, you can actually plausibly assert that if Florida cost Al Gore the presidency, Nader cost Al Gore Florida. You do the logic.
Therefore.
You're standing by in Nashville. Any talk there among the Gore people about a possible recount anywhere, especially given what we've just talked about, 11,000 votes?
We have to assume no, Bernie. Early on tonight, they were saying they were not raising that possibility because they thought they were going to win. And now we know that the vice president has called Governor Bush and wished him well and congratulated him on winning, and that he plans on making a very similar but brief public statement here. So we have to assume if the vice president were coming out to make a public concession speech, that he has no plans to challenge the results. Obviously, if some states' numbers came in differently than we believe them to be right now, that would change the circumstances. But if the vice president were actively planning to challenge the results, we assume he would say nothing tonight, or at least say that he was not prepared to concede defeat. But we are told he will indeed concede here just a few minutes from now. And you see the faces here, depression in the crowd here. And I was just thinking just moments ago, having conversations with senior Democrats in Washington this past week about what would Al Gore do if he lost this election. He has lost his home state of Tennessee, a very Republican state, and he is a man, even though he was the Democratic Party nominee, who does not have a lot of friends among the Democratic Party. And think back to past nominees who have lost. My first presidential campaign, Governor Michael Dukakis of Massachusetts, a man who has become a mystery man in Democratic circles and in political circles. Al Gore must be facing a very tough night tonight, having come so close to winning his dream. This is the son, of course, of a legendary senator here. His father said years ago his son was born to be president. Tonight his son came up just short.
Well, John, it's Bill Schneider. I want to ask you a fairly delicate question. People will blame lots of forces on this narrow defeat. You mentioned Gore's weakness in the southern border states. My question is this: has anyone ever mentioned the possibility of an anti-Semitic backlash among some Americans? Has the campaign ever considered that might materialize, and they might be seeing it in those southern and border states and in states in the West as one possible factor in his defeat?
It was discussed right after the choice was made in speculation, and most of the Gore campaign people said privately they did not believe that would be the case. And in the final days, we have heard no discussion of that. And in the southern states, and even in states like West Virginia and Kentucky, one of the reasons we have seen, or two reasons, I guess, we have seen the vice president struggle. One, Governor Bush made quite a bit, and so did anti-environmental groups, or at least energy industry groups, making the case that his environmental record was too extreme and would cost jobs in coal country in places like West Virginia and Kentucky. And Governor Bush, and the Gore people give him credit for this, was able to frame through the debates, make the case that Al Gore was a big spending liberal, not a DLC New Democrat. So there will be some finger pointing at Ralph Nader, again some finger pointing at Bill Clinton, especially when you look at elderly voters. The Roosevelt elderly have passed on. These are now Eisenhower elderly, is in the words of one top Gore campaign official, and they may support the Democrats on Medicare and Social Security, but they are more culturally conservative. And to see Governor Bush and the vice president split the elderly vote in Florida tells you a lot about what happened tonight. But also remember, 3 presidential debates, 3 debates in which the vice president was believed to have the advantage, even among his own senior staff. They say 3 debates in which the best he did was perhaps a draw or a slight victory in the 3rd debate. By then, Governor Bush had done quite well by himself, and his aides, the Texans' aides, believe, had positioned himself to win this race.
John King, having said all that, to what extent do the Gore people think if it hadn't been for the whole Monica Lewinsky affair, that Al Gore would have been in much, much stronger shape going into this election?
Oh, I think not only just in the Gore campaign, Judy, throughout the Democratic Party and certainly within the Republican Party, almost a universal view that this vice president would have been a prohibitive favorite had the president not been impeached because of the effect that had. A, it brought a challenge from Bill Bradley in the primaries. It didn't turn out to be much of a serious challenge, but it did siphon off time and resources. In the view of many of those moderate to conservative Democrats, it pushed Al Gore to the left, and a lot of discussion, a lot of distress in the Democratic Party, of course, in the months after Al Gore clinched the nomination, that he let Governor Bush seize the center back. But certainly, you're asked about the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Had the president not been impeached, this would have been a vice president who could have run on a record of 22 million new jobs, deficits turned into surpluses as far as the eye could see. Pretty hard to beat. Of course, most people thought President Bush would be pretty hard to beat coming out of the Gulf War. The recession then hurt him. So the vice president likely still would have faced a stiff challenge. But had the president not been impeached, a lot of these cultural issues, the cultural conservative issues, might not have factored nearly as much.
Well, clearly a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on tonight and will continue to go on in the days ahead. But, John, you know, there are people who say, well, why Al Gore still, despite the Lewinsky scandal, despite impeachment, could have openly embraced the successes of this administration and said, I had nothing to do with the personal failings of the president, and just been more open and more direct about it, rather than sort of taking one step forward and one step back, as he seemed to do throughout part of the campaign.
He did do that in the primaries when he was forced to step out and say, you know, the president was his friend, but he was repulsed by the president's behavior. What a lot of Democrats don't think he did a very good job at was finding that balance. In the very end, we did hear in the last 72 hours in every speech, and he did say this from time to time, we shouldn't say the vice president never mentioned Bill Clinton, because he did. He would say, Bill, you gave Bill Clinton and I a chance to turn around the economy. But that was generally at a quick passing reference, never about how the Democratic Party had changed. But think again to another ramification. Bill Clinton, love him or hate him, widely regarded as the premier politician of his generation, he was kept in the stable, if you will, because the Gore campaign had such fear that he would turn off swing voters. Had the president not been impeached, the president could have been out campaigning in every state, not just one or two states at the end.
In fact, John King, I was watching President Clinton, courtesy of C-SPAN, Friday night in California, doing one of these ad-lib speeches that he is a master of, resting his forearm on the podium, making the argument in plain, simple, clear language about keeping the prosperity going. And it did occur to me that whatever else you think of Bill Clinton, for good or ill, there is almost nobody who can take a complicated issue and frame it in a way that people can understand and respond to the way the president can. And maybe the problem was that he couldn't transfer that skill to Al Gore.
Well, a lot of Democrats watching Al Gore would agree with that point completely, Jeff, on the point of Social Security and the Bush plan to partially privatize, to allow people to invest some of their payroll taxes in private accounts. The vice president made a case against it, but if you timed out that little portion of his speech, often it would take a minute, 2 minutes or more. One of even Gore's staffers said the other day that's something Bill Clinton would do in 20 seconds and people would understand it. So the vice president, obviously not the communicator that the president is. Everybody knew that coming into this race. Al Gore, one of the reasons he said he would run as his own man, one of the reasons in every speech he said, I may not be the flashiest politician, but I will stand by you and fight by you. He tried to cast himself as the anti-Clinton in a good way, saying that he might be a little stiff, but that he would be truthful and honest and always stand by his people. And we hear the crowd firing up a bit behind me. I'm going to turn around. They see some of the staffers coming out and the security forces coming out to check the stage to make sure all is well. So there will be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking, a lot of questioning of the vice president's political skills.
John, I wanted to, Bill Schneider, just to ask you a quick question. The Bush campaign people just said that they thought George Bush won it in the debates. Do the Gore people believe that the debates were really a very bad experience for Al Gore and that they made some serious mistakes there?
Yes, they do, because if you go back and look at the polling data, he had quite a bounce out of the Democratic convention, a pretty good week afterwards as he and Joe Lieberman traveled the country. Then there was a bit of a pause, and they believed that if they had a strong first debate, top Gore aides were saying before that first debate in Boston that they thought it could be a knockout punch. They were going that far as to say they thought if the vice president turned in a strong performance in debate one, that the race would be over then. Now, obviously, something quite different happened. Governor Bush acquitted himself quite well by all accounts, including those among Democrats. Democrats said he wouldn't answer this question, or he didn't answer that, or he ducked and dodged this. but in terms of politically coming out of those debates without causing himself any damage, Democrats privately gave him quite a bit of credit, and they were quite upset at the vice president. And we know from sources within the White House, among those who thought the vice president did not handle himself well and was not aggressive enough in defending the administration's record and running on it, was the president himself.
John, we're watching some of the people in the crowd holding up Gore Lieberman signs, trying gamely to make the best of what is clearly a difficult, tough night for all of them. As you describe this setting, sort of tell us where we are, what building is this, what building is that in the background. Talk about some of the emotions on the part of the Gore campaign. I mean, we're thinking about Al Gore's, how he must feel about the president, how he must feel about his whole experience. Clearly, we're not going to know a lot of this because it's going to be kept private. But a lot of questions about those things.
Well, Judy, this site is the War Memorial in downtown Nashville. It's a beautiful building, and those you see here in the crowd, most of them still quite depressed. These are the hardy of the hardiest, many of them the campaign staff. Much of this crowd here, Al Gore's campaign staff. As you can see from the faces, most of the people still left over, relatively young people, those who worked in the trenches for Al Gore most consistently, and they're trying to rally their own spirits here as they wait to hear from the man they worked so hard for these past months, many of them several years or more. But the truth has settled in here, and there's a lot of glum faces walking around, and they'll try to console themselves by listening to the vice president, but you can see it in their faces here. They thought they were going to win, and indeed they came quite close. That probably makes dealing with this all the more harder.
John, at the same time, the polls, to the extent any of us believe those polls, and we do believe them a little bit anyway, Bill Schneider just said, of course we do. Al Gore was running several points behind for some period of time. In fact, he was running behind for a year and a half, and then caught up a little bit around the time of the convention and stayed up, but then has been down again. So I guess the expectation is, on the part of some of us, is that they must have been ready to some degree to lose tonight.
Oh, I think some of the more senior staffers understood the hurdles in front of them, but Candy Crowley made this point a bit earlier. A great many people, not only in the Gore campaign, but throughout the Democratic Party, underestimated Governor Bush from day one. They just could not believe that a man, Al Gore, is, say what you will about his political skills, he's a man of great intellect, has been out ahead on issues like the environment and arms control, served in the House for 8 years, the Senate for 8 years, vice president for 8 years. Many of them just simply did not believe that in the end the American people would pick Governor Bush in office just 6 years, his first elective office, over a man who had served for 24 years and had been part of an administration, the president's impeachment aside, the president's personal feelings aside, that had a pretty impressive record to put forward to the American people.
John, we're looking at this. This is the War Memorial. Is that what you described it as, this building where this is taking place?
Yes, this is the War Memorial building. We're told this crowd being asked to wait just a few minutes longer because the vice president is backstage just putting the finishing touches on his remarks. He's expected out any minute now. This is the scene, Judy. It's right in the center of downtown Nashville. A little bit of an irony there, too. About 45 minutes from here driving is Carthage, Tennessee, where the vice president has a farm just over the river in Elmwood, Tennessee, actually. His mother still lives at the family farm in Carthage, Tennessee, the compound his late father, Senator Albert Gore Sr., lived on for many, many years. Nashville, though, a Republican town. This state more and more Republican. It has a Republican governor, 2 Republican United States senators. So this is an odd time for the vice president tonight to be conceding a presidential election, not only in his home state, but in a home state he lost tonight in the balloting.
And in fact, John King, as we look at this scene, some advanced man with great care set this, what was supposed to be a victory celebration. You look at that shot we saw a few minutes ago, those columns, that enormous American flag designed behind it. And as I look at these folks in the rain, it's, what is it, 2:27 Nashville time, because it's 3:27 here in the East. And you must wonder, all these people who threw their heart and soul into a campaign, who slept on floors, who went into New Hampshire and, brought their sleeping bags, who subsisted on incredibly bad food and low, if no wages. And you have to pause whatever your political feelings and look at these folks and think that the dreams that are dying tonight are not just the dreams of Al Gore and Tipper Gore and the Democratic Party, but all these thousands of people who who I think for whom defeat was almost inconceivable, as opposed to the senior staff people that you described.
It's certainly right, and it's as true as Republicans as it is Democrats. I can remember young kids in the Bush campaign back in 1992 who couldn't for the life of them believe that President Bush, a hero to them, could possibly lose the election. You see much the same that here, and you know, we are always accused of being jaded cynics and the like. When you travel in these campaigns and you spend a year or more on the road, it is oftentimes these youngest of the kids. They're the ones who get the bags to your hotel rooms. They're the ones who hound the senior staff when you can't get them to return a phone call. They're the ones who send you the faxes and send you the schedules. They help you out a great deal. Most of them, a lot of them even take a year off of college to do something like this. And we should give them credit, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, for the hard work they do. And at a moment like this, it's very hard for them.
Texas Governor George Bush has defeated Vice President Al Gore. Mr. Bush with 271 electoral votes. Now let's look at the national raw vote now with 93% of the precincts reporting. You see the figures here. Bush, 49%, 45,851,046 votes. Gore, 48%, 45,664,147 votes.
Bernie, the governor's plurality is now under 200,000. And the more the votes come in, the more that plurality shrinks. We are soon going to approach Kennedy's margin over Nixon, which was 110,000. And if you don't count the Alabama votes, because he wasn't on the ballot, there are people who tell you John Kennedy never got more votes than Dick Nixon. And I think, if I'm beating a dead donkey or elephant, forgive me, but it's late, I think there's a really good chance that Al Gore will get more votes out of the American people tonight than George W. Bush.
And as we report to you from Atlanta, CNN headquarters on this election night, they're standing in the rain in Austin, Texas, where victory is in the air, and they're standing in the rain in Nashville, Tennessee. We just saw and heard from John King. We're waiting for Al Gore to show up to make his concession speech. John reports that the vice president is putting some final touches on those remarks, and they've asked the crowd to hang in there just a little bit longer, and he will appear.
We want to look at the numbers, the raw numbers from the state of Florida, Bernie. Here they are. Again, tight, tight, tight. 99% of the precincts reporting, 49% to 49%. Look at the difference. 2,887,000 to 2,876,000.
Less than 12,000?
Less than
10,000.
Less than 11,000.
10,800.
10,000 and some votes. John King in Nashville, any sense that the vice president may be hesitating because of this popular vote count that is so close, and not just nationally, but in Florida?
Well, Judy, CNN is double-checking the vote count, county by county, in the state of Florida. We are going through that exercise to make sure that that vote count is accurate and that, indeed, George Bush has won the state of Florida.
John King, I know you said a moment ago there was no indication that the governor would, I'm sorry, the vice president would challenge the results tonight, but what about this notion that Jeff just brought up once again, that Al Gore could end up the popular vote winner? Al Gore could end up the popular vote winner.
Well, if they end up the popular vote winner and there's not a controversy about the results in Florida, you would not really have much to argue about. As the results in Florida are so tight, we're told the vice president was coming here to deliver a concession speech, that he had called Governor Bush, and he had already spoken to Governor Bush. There's an echo behind me you can hear in the crowd here. But the vice president's still backstage. We're waiting for him to come out. The echo comes. They have a big screen you can see behind me. From time to time, they're showing various newscasts. And if the news is disappointing to this crowd, they tend to cut them off. But again, we know the vice president is backstage. We've been trying to reach more of his senior aides to find out reasons for the delay. Been unsuccessful in doing so. But we were told when he came over, he had already called Governor Bush. He had wished him well, and that he would deliver a brief concession speech here tonight.
I think we're all sitting around wondering what it is that he may be doing backstage, perhaps talking with the people around him.
Well, were I Al Gore, I don't think I'd be that terribly much in a hurry to rush out there and make the concession. This has to be one of the most difficult things in this man's life.
Yeah, intensely frustrating. You know, historically, when Richard Nixon lost in 1960, he was urged by many people to challenge the vote in Illinois, and he decided in the end not to do it because he said he didn't want to create a constitutional crisis.
Now, what are these people yelling? Let's listen and turn our sound up here. People yelling. Let's listen and turn our sound up here. Recount. They are saying recount.
There's no reason to think that this election was going to end any less bizarrely than it began. I don't believe, I've heard this chant in Senate and gubernatorial races, and loyal fans yell, "Don't concede." But I don't believe I've ever heard this on the eve of what we think is going to be a candidate's concession.
Well, Al Gordon knows that it's very important to go out properly and with style.
Perhaps. I mean, I'm sure that's right. On the other hand, you know, we're looking at these numbers. These numbers are stranger, closer, more bizarre than any election perhaps in 40 years. And as I say, an election that took the twists and turns that this one did, I don't think we, you know, I wouldn't be surprised at this point if an unidentified spacecraft landed in Nashville and an alien got out and made some speech to Al Gore. It's been that kind of a night.
I think we've waited now a sufficient number of minutes since we know his motorcade arrived at this location that it is appropriate for us to ask questions about what is the delay all about. Because presumably there were remarks that were prepared either before he left the hotel or on the way over.
Well, John reported that he wanted to add that he actually wanted to put some finishing touches to his remarks. He could be on the phone with Bill Clinton.
And in fairness, I think some of our hunger to hear the remarks of Mr. Gore and Mr. Bush may be influenced by the lateness of the hour. So I don't want to press bias is always a danger, and I don't want our viewers, assuming they're conscious, to you know, to take too much from this.
And we are wondering, when he comes out to speak, will he say, "It appears that I have lost"? We will be checking the figures very carefully, or will he make an absolute concession? We'll be listening very carefully to how clear a concession speech he makes.
And the speech is very important, which is why he apparently is still working on it, as John King reported.
Well, in a night that has been a roller coaster from the earliest vote count when we had given Florida to Al Gore, and then when we and other news organizations pulled it back, it has been up and down and up and down, and for Nashville, Tennessee, it's down, but
kind of reminds me of the polls over the fall campaign, which were back and forth and ended up too close to call, and it turned out they were right.
That's right. That's right. That's right. John King, you are there. Tell us from your perspective what you're seeing and hearing.
Well, Judy, we're told the vice president has been made aware of the fact that the Secretary of State in Florida is saying this race right now somewhere in the area of a 600-vote margin. Now, what Gore aides are saying is that they don't have to ask for a recount, that if that is the final result, there would be an automatic recount under Florida state law because the results are so close. So we're told what the vice president is working on now is exactly what to say out here. He has already called Governor Bush. He has already congratulated him and wished him well, and he has to come out now and make a public statement. One aide saying that the vice president could just come out and say that if the results stand, it appears Governor Bush will win, and if that is the case, he wishes him well. But we're waiting to hear from the vice president. He's backstage here at the War Memorial. This is another remarkable twist and turn on a very remarkable night.
And
John, explain for us what that is. What is it that the Secretary of State of Florida exactly is saying?
Well, I'm told by our people at CNN that right now the Secretary of State of Florida is saying that the margin is somewhere in the area of 600 to 700 votes based on the current count. Now, we have not heard a final count from the state of Florida, and we obviously need to have that final count. Governor Bush is still said to be ahead, but in most states, indeed probably in every state, if the margin is so narrow, there is an automatic recount just to double-check and triple-check the results. So if the final result in a state as big as Florida was under 1,000 votes, you can be sure there will be a recount.
600 to 700 votes is like one floor of a condominium in South Florida. It's a very, very small number of people.
And I would say, Bill, to underscore that point, it's a very, very small number of people that could determine the presidency in a race that about 100 million people cast votes. But I'll just say it again. I don't know why we thought that this race, which, began with the, Florida being called for Gore, and we mapped out the difficulty that Bush would have, pulled it off the table, declared for Bush. Bush declared the president. Speculation about the transition and who was to blame, and we are sitting here at 20 or 4 in the morning waiting to see whether the Vice President of the United States will concede or come out and say it ain't over till it's over.
That's right, and this could go on and on. God save us.
Well, John, that's why I posed a question about 15 or 20 minutes ago about a recount, but it's become even more of a prospect because of this 600 to 700 vote separation.
Do you mind if we say one more time?
If that margin holds, Bernie, yes.
I'm sorry. No, John, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just simply going to say that if that is the final margin, what we're being told by senior Gore aides, and this would be consistent, I'm not familiar with Florida state law, but I am familiar with many other states, that if the margin is that small, there would be an automatic recount.
And I was simply going to observe that part of what you are hearing is not exhaustion. Trust me, folks. It is, I think, a state of stunned disbelief that a presidential election could be coming down to whether a few hundred vote margin in the state of Florida will or will not stand. I'm simply saying we have never seen anything like this before.
Which means the upshot is every vote counts.
And we have seen Florida tonight in 3 different colors. We've seen it first given to Gore, then put in the toss-up category, then given to Bush.
I think everybody who's watching would like to know if they have to have a recount in the state of Florida, how much time does it take to do something like that, Bill Schneider?
That I can't tell you. It depends. It varies state by state, but I assume they do it.
Is it all in a computer, and they can just check the computer?
It probably varies county by county. They tend to control their own election machinery, but I imagine they will try to do it very, very quickly.
Don't forget the absentee ballot.
Most of them have been counted, but there are a few which come in from overseas. Often just a couple of thousand come in from like overseas military that are counted later. So that could make a difference.
Let's make one other thing clear. We still have not called the state of Wisconsin, and we still have not called the state of Oregon, but again, my apologies to those fine people, those states are completely irrelevant at this point. Whatever happens in Florida determines the presidency of the United States.
They're not irrelevant, though, Jeff, to the popular count in this election. They may be irrelevant if, assuming George W. Bush, that this lead holds and he wins the state of Florida. They may become relevant if something happens in this recount.
No, because if Florida winds up in Gore's column, he's the president of the United States.
Well, that's a big
switch. All I mean is those states will not determine who the president is. It's only up to Florida, which we have called, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I guess now, for George Bush.
Do we have any new information about Oregon? Or let's go to Candy Crowley right now in Austin.
Judy, something to report to you here in this very unusual night. The vice president has recalled the governor and retracted his concession, saying that Florida is too close right now. Now, the Bush campaign reaction to this at this moment is to say they believe they have Florida. According to the governor of Florida, of course, Jeb Bush, they believe they're about 2,200 votes up with only 1 precinct left to count. So they believe they still have Florida. But again, the vice president has called Governor Bush and retracted his concession, at least for the moment.
So, Candy and John, well, let's ask a logical question. If we can think clearly enough at 3:42 in the morning, does this mean that neither Governor Bush nor Vice President Gore will be making public statements now?
We will see the vice president in just a few minutes.
Okay, that is confirmed, and presumably Mr. Bush will be or feel compelled to respond then.
Bernie, if I could give you just a little bit more of the detail to confirm what Candy has just reported. We're told the vice president decided to do this after Bob Butterworth, the attorney general of the state of Florida, a Democrat and a key Gore supporter in that state, reached out to Bill Daley, the chairman of the Gore campaign, and said, hey, wait a minute, not so fast. The situation here on the ground in Florida is not certain yet. The vice president, after all the networks called the state of Florida, thought it was the right thing to do to call Governor Bush and concede, and we're told he did so. Now backstage here, he is rewriting his speech, and we're told he will give a much more general speech talking about his campaign for the presidency, how he wanted to move the country forward, and it looks like he will urge his supporters to just hang in there and keep waiting for the final results. He's not ready to give this up just yet.
Why am I tempted to say only in America?
Does anybody know right now what the Florida count is? Can we call that number up here at CNN? I'd like to look at least the number that we are privy to. In the state of Florida, again, with 99% of the precincts reporting 2,890,321 to 2,884. Jeff Greenfield, do some quick subtraction.
6,100, more or less. But John King is reporting that, in fact, what the Gore campaign was told that the margin isn't 6,000, which is what our board is showing, but in fact 600.
What would they be basing that on?
I assume that there's later counts than we have.
600 to 700 was what he said.
Yep.
From the Secretary of State of Florida, apparently.
Well, when a fellow party member happens to be the state attorney general, Bob Butterworth, gives you a call and calls your campaign manager and says, hold it just a minute, don't go out there and make a flat-out concession. What do? You listen to him.
I think when you are about to concede the presidency of the United States, you're darn right you listen to him.
I am told by our executive producer, Sid Bedingfield, that what's going on right now is CNN is checking discrepancies between the VNS, which is the Voter News Service, which is the numbers you're seeing here, discrepancies perhaps between those numbers, the numbers the Associated Press is reporting, and the numbers being reported by the Florida Secretary of State, Mr. Butterworth, who we just heard John King quote as having put it down to a 600 to 700 vote margin rather than the 6,000. Actually, a little less than 6,000. No, 6,100 vote margin we see there. I have to say I've been covering elections for 24 years. I've never seen anything like this.
Yes. And beyond
Jeff,
speechless is absolutely not close. I mean, this is the kind of election that, bad political movies or not so bad novels necessarily are written about. It is simply stranger than fiction.
Think about what Mark McKinnon told Candy. He said we were totally in the darkness when we saw the networks, CNN calling Florida for Al Gore. And he said then our spirits were lifted again when Florida was taken out of the Gore column and put uncertain. And look at, here we're looking at a huge crowd of people in Nashville who, up until a few minutes ago, were looking total blackness in the face.
That's right.
And now their spirits are revived.
Wherever you're watching CNN's live, nonstop coverage of this election 2000 tonight, whether it's in the United States or around the world, what's happening is this. Just in case you're getting up somewhere and you're saying, we're still here, yes, we're still here. The basic storyline out of the United States is that Texas Governor George Bush has defeated Vice President Al Gore. Mr. Bush garnering 271 electoral votes. Right now, the scene is shifted to Nashville, Tennessee, outside the Gore campaign headquarters, and Austin, Texas, outside the governor's campaign headquarters. What we're waiting for is a concession statement from Vice President Gore. What we've learned is that there's a question about the closeness of the race in Florida, and therefore Mr. Gore's concession statement is not likely to be categorical. We assume that after Mr. Gore comes out and addresses these very faithful supporters by the thousands in the rain, it's chilly there, then Governor Bush in Austin will have something to say. So if you're just getting up and wondering, don't these people know how to go to bed and go to sleep? No, we don't. We can't leave until we've heard from these two principals on this very historic political outcome in the United States presidential race for the White House.
I don't think I have the vocabulary to describe what we have witnessed tonight. literally from the very early part of the evening when Florida was coming in for Gore, and then Michigan. And then when we found Gore was not, that Florida was not in Gore's corner after all, and slowly the numbers built up for George W. Bush. At 2:18 this morning Eastern Time, Bernie, you called the presidency for George W. Bush. We learned soon after that, about 2:30, we were told later, Al Gore called George Bush on the telephone, congratulated him, said he'd run a good campaign. Words to that effect. The crowds gathered, and here we are an hour and 20 minutes later.
You know, we're grasping for words, but I cannot wait until Inside Politics is on the air Wednesday, 5 Eastern Time, and I cannot wait to hear Bruce Morton's reporting.
We may
on
still
this.
be sitting here then,
I was going to say, I don't think
it'll be marvelous.
You may not have to wait. You'll be right here. Hold it.
On the phone, on the telephone with us is a gentleman named Ed Cast, who is a Florida elections official. Mr. Cast, can you first give us your title?
I'm the Assistant Division Director for the Division of Elections.
And can you clarify for us exactly what the vote count is at this moment in Florida?
It stands right now at 2,904,198 for Governor Bush, Mr. Cheney, and 2,902,988 for Vice President Gore and Mr. Lieberman.
And what is that separation? I'm doing quick subtraction myself.
1,300 votes?
13.
About 1,300 votes, is that right, Mr.
1,200 votes.
Yeah, roughly that. I don't have a calculator in front of me, I'm sorry.
Is there a mechanism, Mr. Cast, by which the state of Florida would automatically do its own recount if the numbers, the candidate numbers were close enough together?
Yeah, the state requires an automatic recount unless the candidates tell us differently at a less than 0.5%.
Now, Mr. Cast,
and less than 0.5%.
Yeah, 0.5% or less.
And are we at that point?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I'm just getting you to verify it.
Sure, I understand.
How complete is this count?
We've still got our overseas absentee ballots that will be coming in. They'll be required to come in or allowed to come in up to 10 days as long as they're postmarked as of November 7th.
Excuse me, but based on your knowledge, can you estimate at all, roughly, how many of those votes we're talking about, even roughly?
No, I can't give you an estimate whatsoever, other than I can tell you that in 1996, there was roughly 2,200 of those that were counted in the 10-day count.
And what are you doing, Mr. Cast, to secure the ballots already counted throughout Florida?
The ballots are secured at the county level. I'm not quite sure I understand.
Any extra moves, given the seriousness of this situation, is your office making any extra move that you normally wouldn't make to ensure that everything stays in position so that when you conduct this recount?
No, the county supervisors of elections are responsible for that, and they're very used to and recounts on other issues and other candidates and races. We still have a couple of counties that have not counted their absentee ballots anyway. So.
Then how many, you started to say, you still have overseas ballots, and you said it'll take 10 days to count those. What other ballots are still outstanding?
Well, there are some other counties that have not reported their absentee ballots that would normally have to be into their office by November 7th at 7 p.m.
Which counties?
As I look at our website, I see Citrus has not reported theirs, and Hendry, Hillsborough, a couple of others, Okeechobee, looks like.
And where are those counties, if you can tell us, Mr. Cast? Are they up in the north? Are they on the Panhandle?
Well, they really kind of spread all over the state.
So there's no way you can characterize what...
No, I sure can't.
How many? Hillsborough is a large county.
Well, Hillsborough is, yes.
What do you think of all this, Ed Cast?
Well, at 3:50 in the morning, I'm not sure I'm thinking.
You said a moment ago that the law it's a state law that requires an automatic recount if the vote is under, what did you say, half of 1%?
Less than half of 1%.
And unless you said the candidates request otherwise.
Well, there's a provision in there if a candidate notifies us that they don't wish the recount, then we're not obligated.
But we can presume that's not the case this time.
Okay, Mr. Cast, I just want to review the bidding, okay? Because we may be talking about the outcome of the presidential election here. Right now, Governor Bush is leading Vice President Gore by, we think, about it's 1,310 votes, if Judy's math is right. You've got 20, roughly, based on the past, a couple of thousand overseas absentee ballots and an unknown number of absentee ballots from Hillsborough and a couple of other counties. Is that right?
That's correct.
So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but is it a fair statement that we do not yet know who has won the state of Florida?
We've got George Bush ahead. But it's not; those are preliminary and unofficial figures. They're not by any means official.
That's what I had in mind.
And as we talk to you, Mr. Cass, just to tell you that we're looking at a live picture from Nashville outside the Gore campaign headquarters, and I just saw the teleprompters with the see-through glass that you can see on your left and right as you're giving a speech. I take that as a very positive sign, as do apparently these people here, and it would seem that the Vice President's arrival on that podium, that stage, is imminent. Judy?
Yeah, I recalculated, Bernie. I see 1,210 votes separating them, and that's without. Now that's, in other words, of 600 votes in either direction could change it. Maybe that's what Mr. Butterworth was referring to. But that's without the overseas ballots, which you, Mr. Cass, said in 1996, where you said around 2,200.
That's correct.
And then the absentee ballots from these other counties that you listed, Hillsborough, Okeechobee, Hendry, Citrus, and some others. Would you assume those run in the dozens, the hundreds, or the thousands?
I would not even hazard a guess.
Are you telling us that none of the absentee ballots have been counted in those counties, or just some of them?
It's not that none of them, it's just some of them.
Some of them, so it's not the full absentee ballots.
What are you hearing from your other colleagues up and down the state? Are you folks talking to each other tonight, or what?
We have talked to the supervisors of elections and some of their staff just as a matter of course for the night. A lot of via file transfers and internet reporting, so it's kind of an automatic update thing. But we've talked to them.
What are they saying?
It's been a lot of work, and it's been a very heavy turnout.
What are the? I assume you've been doing this for some time, Mr. Cast, working in the elections division. What are the odds that there could have been a miscount somehow here?
I've only actually been in the elections division for 5 years, and so as far as a miscount, I really couldn't tell you. I know in the last presidential election as well as the last gubernatorial election, we didn't have a problem on miscounts or problems of that nature.
Ed Cass, tell us what happens tomorrow now. What procedures, what steps, given what's
tomorrow?
Right
tomorrow,
now?
the counties will start their canvass and do their official reporting to us, and they'll provide us all of their official results that will include the initial absentee ballots. We'll consolidate all 67 counties and come up with the state canvass report and issue that. And then 10 days later, we'll come up with a second canvass that will be only record those overseas absentee ballots.
And how long would it take to conduct a recount, Mr. Cast?
If we're thrown into a recount, or if there is a recount, they'll start that just as soon as just as soon as we notify them, which will probably be first thing tomorrow morning.
And how long would that take?
I'm sorry, I do not know.
But is it days, hours? I mean, that's what we're trying to figure out here.
Yeah, and that part, it would just depend on how long it takes them to recount.
Well, wouldn't it be a minimum of 10 days if you have your 67 counties filing a consolidated report, then you have a canvass report, and then you said 10 days later you have a second canvass report? Wouldn't there still be a 10-day separation? Did we lose Ed Cast? Well, he
have.
certainly was a font of information.
He was.
He
Certainly was a font of information.
Just quickly to recap, he said according to the official count, and he said he's the assistant division director for the election division in the state of Florida, the official count, 2,904,198 for George Bush, 2,902,988 for Al Gore. That is a difference by my math anyway of 1,210 votes out of almost 6 million votes cast in the state of Florida.
Not bad for 4 o'clock in the morning math, Judy. And I'll tell you that at the risk of restating this, we are now looking potentially at the single most bizarre election night.
Not only that we've covered, but that
ever.
I think you're going back to a lot of history. We are on the, I mean, consider 100 million Americans have voted, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, we are talking with a very well-informed local election official in the state of Florida, who I think basically is telling us that with these numbers, we cannot say with certainty who has won the state of Florida and therefore the presidency of the United States.
And just a reminder, we're looking at crowds in Nashville, Tennessee, the Al Gore crowd, of course, and in Austin, Texas, the George W. Bush crowd. The reason these Florida votes are so important is that Florida, whoever wins the popular vote in the state of Florida, gets those 25 electoral votes, and one or the other of them has to have those votes in order to be elected president.
Let's take a look at the national raw vote right now, just to refresh ourselves and where the numbers are. Look at this, 94% of the precincts are in.
The margin, Bernie, if I may, 151,000 votes out of 92.7 million votes cast. We are now in Kennedy-Nixon territory.
Robert Novak in Washington, wake up.
Whoa.
Bob Novak?
Yes.
What?